the car.
Thank you for that brief recess. We just had a few technical difficulties. Continuing on, this meeting of the Disaster Recovery International Affairs and Planning Committee of the Maui County Council is located on the traditional Aina of Kanaka Oiwi, who never ceded their sovereignty to the United States. We recognize that Her Majesty Queen Liliuokalani yielded the Hawaiian Kingdom to the U.S. in duress under threat of violence to avoid the bloodshed of her people. We further recognize that Hawaii remains an illegally occupied nation state by the United States, as documented in a 2021 scholarly article for the National Lawyers Guild Review by Andrew Reed, adjunct professor of law at the University of Denver Sturm College of Law. Generations of Kanaka Maoli and their knowledge systems have sustainably cared for Hawaii and continue to do so. We are grateful to occupy this space and learn the ways in which we can contribute. As a committee, we seek to support the varied strategies that Indigenous people of Hawaii are using to protect their land and their communities, and commit to dedicating time and resources to working in solidarity. From the administration, we have with us Deputy Corporation Counsel Mike Hopper, Deputy Director of Transportation, Diane Yogi, Executive Assistant to the Office of Recovery, Jordan Hart. Mr. Schlecht's not here, yeah. Okay. And from the Department of Environmental Management, Director Shane Agawa, Director of Public Works, Jordan Molina, Fire Captain Oliver Voss, Planning Director, Kate Blystone, and Administrative Planning Officer Greg Post. Our other resources are Stefan Pellegrini, Principal Opticos Design Inc., and that's for DRIP 9/1. Members, without objection, I will designate Mr. Pellegrini as a resource person under Rule 18A of the Rules of the Council due to his knowledge and expertise as an architect, urban designer, and planner.
No objections.
Our committee staff for today, we have Senior Committee Secretary Yvette Boutillier, Legislative Analysts Jarrett Pasquale and Keone Hurdle, Assistant Clerk Jean Pokipala, and Legislative Attorney Carla Nakata. On our agenda for today, we have DRIP 9, a presentation on missing middle housing. DRIP 2 and 3, we will take together. DRIP 2 is Bill 103, amending Chapter 19.08 Maui County Code relating to density within residential districts, and DRIP 3, Bill 104, 2024, amending Chapters 19.04, 19.08, and 19.29 Maui County Code relating to kitchens, kitchenettes, and wet bars, and Section 19.36B.020 Maui County Code to add parking requirements for dwelling units with kitchenettes. We will take testimony after opening remarks or presentations. So moving on to DRIP 9(1), missing middle housing. Under Rule 7B of the Rules of the Council, the committee intends to receive a presentation on missing middle housing from Stefan Pellegrini relating to missing middle housing, a term referring to a range of house-scale building types with multiple units in walkable neighborhoods. The committee may also discuss other related matters. However, no legislative action will be taken on this item. So it was requested, this presentation would have been referred to the Housing and Land Use Committee, but thankful to Member Kama to let the presentation be scheduled in this committee ahead of Bill 103 and 104 to kind of explain how 103 and 104 could look here in Maui. The Planning Department presented this during the Maui Planning Commission meeting of February 25th, 2025. And missing middle housing refers to a range of multifamily housing types that are compatible in scale with single-family walkable neighborhoods. 3 additional documents, like in addition to the presentation, were provided by Opticos Design, which you can review on Granicus. Attachment number 2 is an executive summary on missing middle housing study. Attachment number 4 is the final memorandum on the missing middle housing study for Central, South, and West Maui. This is the first report in the study that describes the analysis used to identify missing middle housing ready areas. And attachment 3 is the final report on the missing middle housing study, which goes into greater depth to assess potential housing types that could fit on typical lot sizes in Maui. At this time, we will receive opening comments and presentation from Mr. Stefan Pellegrini of Opticos Design.
Thank you, Chair Pelton, and thank you everyone for giving me this opportunity to speak with you today. I'm going to do a brief presentation overview of the materials that were in your packet, and I look forward to a conversation with you on this topic. I'm going to share my screen, just one moment. And through the chair, I'd like to verify that you can see my screen that I'm sharing.
We sure can. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. So this is what I'm going to try to cover today. This should just be a brief overview of about 10 to 15 minutes. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the work that we prepared on behalf of the Hawaii Community Foundation. I'll introduce you to the missing middle housing concept and talk about this work as it is relevant to Central, South, and West Maui. As Chair Pelton mentioned, we prepared a 2-part study to provide recommendations on where and how Maui could expand housing choice and affordability. The first piece of this was what we refer to as a scan, which is a report that identifies different places in the community that are suitable for missing middle housing and provides an introduction to some of the zoning and policy levers which can be shifted to provide more MMH. And then the second report we refer to as a deep dive, which provides a little bit more information about typical situations where missing middle housing can be located, the feasibility of those kinds of projects, and then a deeper dive on zoning and policy recommendations. As Chair Pelton mentioned, when we use this term, MMH, we refer to house-scale buildings with multiple units in walkable neighborhoods. We call it missing because this middle scale that's between single-family homes and larger, more intense mixed-use commercial and multifamily buildings are often absent from many communities today, although many cities and counties, communities all over the United States were built with these kinds of housing types in their neighborhoods for many years, but more recently they have been absent. And we use this term middle, both to talk about that middle scale, but also to refer to the middle-class households that this kind of housing can support. And so we are looking not only at housing types that can provide sort of a neighborhood style of living, but also housing types that can be sold or rented at an attainable cost, and provide sort of a broader number of housing choices in our communities. This is sort of part of what we refer to as the barbell of affordable housing. And there's a lot of different ways that we can sort of expand housing choice and availability in communities. On one hand, we can subsidize housing through programs like low-income tax credits. This is really good at providing housing for low and very low incomes. At the other end of the spectrum, we can actually build market rate housing, which tends to be in more intense buildings. That does a lot to increase the supply, but because these buildings are typically complicated and expensive to build, they tend to serve only the upper tiers of the market. And so we're left with something in the middle that we try to actually reach that can be lower cost by design, and also continue to provide, as I mentioned, these neighborhood-styled living choices for families. The characteristics of missing middle include, as I mentioned, smaller, well-designed, house-scaled buildings. We try to sort of maintain private and shared open spaces to sort of maintain that neighborhood living. We also look for places in the community where housing can go, where people can actually be a little bit less car dependent. And so we're looking primarily at places in the communities where there is some degree of connectivity and walkability, not to eliminate car use, but to find where there are sort of opportunities to reduce or become less dependent on automobiles. I mentioned that this is missing. There are local examples. These are photos that include places that many of you may recognize on Maui, as well as some missing middle housing types found on the neighboring island of Kauai. I mentioned that this has to do with housing attainability. As all of you are aware, there are some very extreme housing affordability issues on Maui, and very little land in the county is actually zoned for multifamily housing. And so we have a lot of constraints, both from land availability and also sort of the prices. The way that this sort of is reflected are high home costs, high rents, and very large percentage of families who we refer to as house burdened. That means that they pay more than 30% of their total household income on their monthly rent. These numbers below, I believe the recent HERO report has actually revised this number at the bottom down to 20%. Only 20% of Maui households can now afford a mortgage on a medium price single family home. So in order to sort of do this work, we started by looking at different geographies in West Central and South Maui. We looked at both natural constraints. We studied very carefully the work that county planning and others had done, starting with the island plan, also down to the community plans. And we looked at the testing several of the communities on the island to understand the sort of connectivity and the pattern of where local services and amenities are. And what we found is that there's sort of a variety of different centers in the community that are mixed use in character that can support different types of housing in and around these centers. We refer to these in the reports as missing middle ready areas, and we're looking primarily at a 5 to 10 minute walk radius around these centers. Again, to try to sort of understand where there are opportunities to locate housing in places where we can get people close to services and the convenience of local amenities. Many of these are places that you might be familiar with. On Maui, they are both sort of more intense places that you might find in Kahului or Wailuku, but also in many of the sort of the historic neighborhood centers that you find in different communities upcountry and on the south side, different places on the island. We compiled these missing middle ready areas into a series of maps, which you'll find in the reports. And these represent sort of the geographies that we looked at to understand where and how these opportunities could exist. We then looked for sort of repeating patterns, and what we found is that there were 6 residential zones that were most prevalent in these areas. Those are R1, R2, and R3, also A1, B2, and WRA. And so we looked at those 6 with a little bit more attention to detail to understand what could fit there and what sort of opportunities there might be to recommend changes to allow more housing to occur in those areas. Here are the missing middle ready areas on West Maui and in the upcountry for reference. When we did this additional sort of test fit work I mentioned on these 6 zones, we looked at a variety of lots that we saw were actually repeating in the community, so that we knew that if we analyzed a situation in one location, that it actually would have meaning and relevance across lots of different geographies on the island. We tested these for what would fit on a lot, thinking about sort of the different principles that I shared earlier, but we also tested them for financial feasibility to try to understand if developers could actually produce market rate housing that actually could result in attainable units for sale or for rent. And through this analysis, there were sort of repeating findings that we found. We found that in order to improve on feasibility and attainability, there were levers, particularly on the zoning side, that could be shifted that would help make projects more feasible and more likely to deliver, as I mentioned, attainable units that would be available to a median range of incomes. 4 of those are listed here. You can see 2 of those that have to do with density and reducing parking requirements are relevant to development standards in the zoning ordinance. We found that these are levers. When they can be shifted, we can actually increase the feasibility and attainability of housing projects. I'm going to take you through a few of these examples, and the purpose of these is just to get a sense, again, of what fits, but also sort of provide some guidance on the form and character of missing middle housing, thinking about actually sort of how it might be compatible with the neighborhoods where it actually could be introduced. This first one is typical residential lots in Kihei. You can see it's 75 by 100 feet. And this is an example of what we learned could fit here. This is a 5-unit project that would incorporate a triplex building and 2 ADUs. You can see it actually can also incorporate shared and common open space, and we can achieve a 1 space per unit off-street parking ratio in addition for this type. You all sort of speak about density and square footage per unit. And so to kind of give a reference here, this kind of project would provide upwards of 29 dwelling units to the acre that actually translates to about 1,500 square feet per residential unit. This is another sort of illustration that shows how that kind of project might fit into a residential neighborhood. You can see sort of the 1 to 2 story character and the detached buildings, which would be sort of designed to accommodate sort of that neighborhood compatibility that we talked about earlier. Here's the second one in Central Kahului. This is sort of an example of how a larger infill site could deliver a missing middle housing neighborhood. This is a larger site, just under 17 acres. Many of you are probably familiar with the site in the B2 zone. We looked at this sort of for understanding what could be achieved with missing middle housing types, and we found that this could accommodate about 455 units. Again, providing sort of substantial open space, neighborhood living, and retaining that off-street parking ratio that we discussed earlier. This translates to about 27 dwelling units to the acre, which again is about 1,500 square feet per residential unit. This gives an example of sort of the form and scale that we can see on larger projects. We actually could incorporate large community open spaces and shared open spaces into this kind of neighborhood scheme. I mentioned a little bit previously about zoning barriers. This slide provides sort of a summary of some of the repeating elements that we found when we looked at these zones, where there were levers that actually could be pushed or pulled that would enhance or increase, as I mentioned, the possibility or potential for these projects to actually be developed. You can see that density is a sort of fairly consistent barrier to missing middle. We also looked closely at lot size, lot coverage, and setbacks. You can see that this sort of provides a roadmap for things that might be considered now, but also in the future as you all work to continue to amend and update your Title 19, that there might be some additional opportunities to consider some of these levers to allow additional missing middle housing in your communities. And this is just sort of an example of how this plays out. We know that the existing lot size based density limits in the R zones, for example, are resulting in densities of generally between 4 and 7 dwelling units to the acre. That's between sort of 6 and 10,000 square feet per unit. And you can see that if we look at this from the standpoint of what can fit with these types of buildings and these types of sort of neighborhood-oriented projects, we can see that we can achieve densities upwards of 20 to 30 dwelling units to the acre. An interesting point I want to make here that this actually is maintaining the lot coverage and open space requirements in the R zones. That wasn't sort of a lever that needed to be pushed or pulled in reaching this kind of missing middle housing output on these parcels. So the reports actually provide and include an implementation summary. There are emerging topics that it starts to discuss and provide some guidance for actually what could happen next. These include policy and zoning levers, as I mentioned, but also recommendations for streamlining the application review and entitlement process. There's also opportunities to think about changes to the building code that many communities across the United States are considering to or have actually already achieved in order to actually make some of these possible. There's ongoing discussions about coordinating efforts of infill with infrastructure investments in the community, and also discussions around funding, financing, and ways that this kind of development can be incentivized for local developers. We had an opportunity through the process to start a conversation with the community with an open house that was held earlier this year. We would look for sort of additional opportunities to continue this conversation, looking for opportunities in the community, but also continuing to discuss both concerns, issues, and what people might like about this kind of proposal. And the report in conclusion also outlines some sort of more detailed next steps that could be happening down the road. These include sort of consideration of pilot projects, but also thoughts about how more robust changes to Title 19 could be included in the longer term. Those could include overlay zones or floating zones, ways that folks could be incentivized to introduce these kinds of projects in these neighborhood contexts, as well as sort of additional recommendations for partnerships and implementation projects that could be considered down the road. So I want to thank all of you for this time today. I know our time is short, but I look forward to additional questions and conversation on this topic. As I mentioned, that this rollout actually started with the community back in December. We had a chance to talk with the Planning Commission earlier in February. We recommend that all of you take a look at the documents that were provided and invite you to visit the House Maui website to download copies of the reports and the executive summary. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Any opening comments from planning or fire and public safety? Go ahead, Director Blystone.
Well, hello. Thank you to the committee for listening to this today. This all started back when I was with Hawaii Community Foundation, and we knew we needed to understand why these missing middle projects weren't happening through the House Maui initiative. And so we literally hired the guys that wrote the book on missing middle housing, Opticos Design, and they've been working hard in Kauai County to make the changes there. But that was one of the reasons we chose them. So we think this is relevant for your next conversation because missing middle could occur in all of these residential districts. And so I asked Stefan to describe this in the context of, units per square foot. So you could be thinking about that when you're talking about Bill 103 next. We just wanted you to be able to see the possibilities that are available if we make some of these changes to our residential code. So that's all for my opening remarks, and it sounds like Stefan has to step off, but he'll be back later.
Okay, at this time I would like to recognize Member Kama, Aloha Winala, and Alito.
Aloha Winala Chair and Alito. Pardon my tardiness. I forgot my keys in my house and couldn't get here. Had to call somebody for the keys so I can get here. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you for persevering. Okay, and any opening remarks from Captain Voss on the presentation?
Yeah, just trying to make my camera and mic work. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you and see you.
I did participate in this presentation once before at the invitation of Kate, and we support that kind of development because inherently those buildings have a lot of the fire protection requirements that are associated with that. So when we get into building structures of 3 or more internal dwellings, there's a lot of protection requirements that come along with that wouldn't require any further revisions. So I like what the direction we're going, and I want to be kept up on any more information on that, and we definitely support the middle housing. Thank you for sharing that presentation.
Thank you. At this time, we will now move on to public testimony for missing middle housing, which is DRIP 9/1. Written testimony is encouraged and can be submitted via the e-comment link at mauicounty.us/agendas. Testifiers wanting to provide oral testimony should join the online meeting via the Microsoft Teams link printed on today's agenda, or call into the phone number which is also on today's agenda. For individuals wishing to testify via Teams, please raise your hand by clicking on the raise your hand button near the top right of your screen. For those calling in, please follow the prompts via phone. Staff will add names to the testifier list in the order testifiers sign up or raise their hands. For those on Teams, staff will lower your hand once your name is added. Staff will then call the name you're logged in under or the last 4 digits of your phone number when it is your time to testify. At that time, staff will also enable your microphone and video. If you wish to testify anonymously, please notify staff. Otherwise, please state your name for the record at the beginning of your testimony. Oral testimony is limited to 3 minutes. If you are still testifying beyond that time, I will kindly ask you to complete your testimony. Once you're done testifying, or if you do not wish to testify, you can view the meeting on Akaku, Channel 53, Facebook Live, or mauicounty.us/agendas. At this time, we will call on testifiers wishing to testify on DRIP 9:1. Staff, can you please call the first testifier?
Yes, Chair. First up to testify, we have Mr. Tom Crowley on Teams.
Aloha, Mr. Crowley. We're ready
Aloha,
for your
committee.
testimony.
Thank you. I saw this presentation at the Planning Commission, and I appreciate seeing it again. In between that time, I took the opportunity to drive by one of the example lots that was given in Kihei and tried to imagine what was proposed, a triplex plus 2 accessory dwellings and only 1 parking space for each of those dwelling units. I looked at the parking that was already taking up most of the street, and I could not even imagine if a new owner of this lot came into that neighborhood and said, I'm going to build, 5 dwellings on this property. What do the neighbors feel about it? It just, in that particular case, would not work. I don't believe that Maui has too many opportunities to be walkable in our existing communities. While this particular example was just off of South Kihei Road, there is little to no chance that someone's going to live there without a car and walk to the grocery store and walk to their job or whatever the case may be. So while I don't want to throw water on this whole idea, I think the idea is fine, but I think shoehorning some of these ideas into the existing neighborhoods is really not going to work, certainly not to the extent that it was just proposed there. And I gave you guys this same kind of warning before. If you allow condominiumization of these units, which it kind of sounded like that was part of this proposal, was that we could make less expensive units that people could live in, do recognize they will be snapped up by people who want a second home on Maui. You have failed to stop that in the apartment district. Everything built in the apartment district since 1991 has had the requirement must be used for long-term residential housing. I dare you guys to just look up how the units in the apartment district that have been built since 1991 in places like Kihei and West Maui are actually being used. If you do, as I have, you'll find that more than 50% of them are second homes. They're not used for vacation rental. They are used exclusively as second homes. And I do believe that that is one of the problems here with if you allow these smaller units to be built. If they're rentals for the owner, fine. But if they're going to be available for sale via condominiumization, you are really creating more opportunities for second homes. That's, on this subject, that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley, for your testimony. Questions for the testifier, Member Sugimura?
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate you taking that extra effort to check it out, and you're making me think that they're subject to short-term vacation rental situations, even if we want it to be long-term. Is that what we're
Not
opening
short-term
up?
rental, just to be clear. Not someone buying it to use in any way, shape, or form for short-term rental. Someone buying it to use for their own use a portion of the year, which is how most of apartments built in the apartment district since 1991 are being used, not as short-term rentals. They don't rent them out to people on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or anything like that. The owners use them, their families use them, their friends use them, but they are strictly second homes.
Okay. I'm understanding a new tax you're talking about, so thank you, Mr. Crowley.
Member Lee?
Hi, Tom. So now we know the disadvantages. Are there any advantages to this type of housing?
Well, I certainly like the increase in density, and we're going to talk about it more in the next two items as to how we might be able to increase density. I just didn't like the particular example that was made of a triplex plus 2 accessory dwellings, 5 dwellings, and then saying, well, we can fit all these, but we only need to put 5 parking spaces on there. No, you need 10 parking spaces if you're going to put 5 dwellings on a property. And even with 10 parking spaces, I can guarantee there's going to be people parking in the street. So I do believe that we can consider density. But something like this, with the whole basic proposal, it kind of works if you're creating a community from the ground up, an existing community where you're going to know exactly where you're going to place your business, so forth. But trying to retrofit our current communities for this, I really don't see it fitting in too many places, at least not the ones I'm familiar with.
Okay, thank you.
Member Cook?
Member Johnson had his hand up first and then me.
Oh, Member Johnson?
Okay, all right, fine. I don't mind waiting, but Mr. Crowley, clarifying question. You know, I hear your conversation on condominiumization, and you're absolutely right. Those apartments have been going to second homeowners across the nation. But if we're talking about my lot or your lot, and you wanted to put an Ohana on your lot, it's really up to you as the owner if you're going to sell to a mainland person. You might be having sons or daughters or aunties or uncles or grandmas who you could sell that within your family, right? It's a bit of a free market kind of angle too. It's really up to the person who owns their lot, if they do condominiumize, who they will sell it to. Am I correct?
Certainly, but I mean, we kind of know how condominiumization has worked out, say, in Laniapoco. Okay, so when you make a rule like this and you say people can condominiumize, people are going to do that. Many people are going to do that for what the most return on their investment is going to be. But in the example that you made, if some family owns a lot, like I own my lot here, and I want to build an Ohana, and my family member is going to live in the Ohana, I could work out a situation internally that he owns it, but it's not recorded as a deed, I suppose, you know. But as soon as you open the door up to splitting these larger lots up into smaller lots, hoping you're going to make housing for local people, I just have a feeling that more than half of them are not going to be for local people. They're going to end up being something different.
I understand that, and of course, hopefully legislation can address that. But I think, the stats that they showed, and I'm sure you are, Mr. Crowley, that folks are really struggling to pay the mortgage, right? There's a term for that, and we're just struggling that everything above 30% of our income is going towards mortgage. We all know people 50% going towards their mortgage. I think that kind of, I don't want to get into debate here, of course, I'm just trying, but the idea that there are sections of our community that are really hurting to pay the mortgage, and condominiumization could help them shrink their mortgage, shrink their responsibilities, and able to live in those homes. So for clarifying, what say you?
Well, let's figure out what you said legislation could address this. Let's figure out what legislation would need to come forward in order to prevent what I just laid out for you. Mm-hmm. You guys heard testifiers from the folks in Kihei that bought affordables recently, and they said their mortgage payment was $5,000, $7,000. Right. And those were duplex, little tiny units, 900 square feet. And again, while we think we're creating a $300,000 home that someone could afford here, I can picture us creating luxury little dwellings, that each of those becomes $1 million thing, unless you have a way out of that, So it's just a precaution that I'm saying you better take, or we're going to see neighborhoods turn into something different than what you intend.
Thank you for that, Chair. Or thank you, Chair.
Member Cook?
Thank you, Chair. My clarifying question for Mr. Crowley, do you envision older neighborhoods like, say, Kahului as an example, the increments that have larger lots the homes that are somewhat at the end of their life expectancy. They're kind of CMU blocks that are, anyway. But you see examples of people making multifamily homes successfully in there. So do you think the Kahului area, the increments, and also vacant, low-use, light industrial areas in Kahului would be an opportunity to kind of do a master planned this type of development?
I would agree with you that it's already happening to some degree in Kahului. We see some of those smaller, block homes that were 1,700 square feet get replaced by these homes that go, edge to edge and are 2 stories high and probably have 4 or 5 units in them already. So yes, I kind of see that that's already happening there. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think those would be snapped up by second homeowners. You don't have a lot of second homeowners who are looking in Kahului to buy places. But I'm cautioning you that in Kihei, you certainly do, and in West Maui. So yes, there may be places where this could fit better, this kind of redevelopment idea could fit better. But if it goes across the whole island and we apply it to all R1, R2, R3 zoning, wow, I think you're going to get something different than what we might want.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Any more questions for the testifier? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Can you please call the next testifier?
Chair, I believe Mr. J.C. Law was approaching the podium.
Okay, did he sign up? Okay.
Thank you, Kano. Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Thank you for wearing that old T-shirt. It takes some of the pressure off. Thank you, Luna Ho'omalu Paulton, for letting me testify without duress. Aloha kako, everybody. Oval J.C. Law, I'll try to keep it relevant. I would like to improve my neighborhood, so mahalo to the guests for the presentations. The words walkable neighborhoods caught my attention because if I send my neighbor a note or letter, it takes 3 days, but it takes me less than 3 minutes to walk to their hale. And if my neighbor is a council member, I'm worried after yesterday's great committee meeting, it might even be a crime to mail them a birthday card.
Questions for the testifier? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Any further testifiers?
Chair, that's all the individuals signed up to testify. We could do last call.
Sure.
If there's anyone else in the audience or on Teams who would like to testify, please come up to the mic and begin your testimony, or use the raise your hand function on Teams and staff will unmute you. I'll provide a brief countdown. 3, 2, 1. Seeing none, Chair, no one has indicated that they wish to testify.
Members, any objection to closing public testimony on this item?
No objections.
Okay, public testimony is closed, accepting any written testimony into the record. For this item, since we have 2 bills, we can start off with 1 round of 3-minute questions. Is Mr. Stefan available for questions?
Chair, he indicated that he was going to be able to dial back in. He had to, I think it's 5:15 over there, so he had to do something with his kids, I believe. So hopefully he's back.
Okay. And then if not, can members direct their questions to you?
I can do my best.
Okay, let's try one round of 3-minute questions. We'll start with Committee Vice Chair Nohe Hodgins.
Thank you, Chair. While our presenter is no longer here, that was a really informative presentation, so thank you, and thank you guys. While it wasn't presented, it was in Organicus, but it basically says these types are not new and we just stopped building them. I'm wondering if you can tell us why, and then I'm wondering if we could discuss some of the barriers to getting it rebuilt. But if you could answer why and then discuss some of the barriers, I would appreciate it.
So I wish Stefan was here because he studied this question across the country, right? And so he has a deeper understanding of it. But my understanding is that zoning has kind of changed over time. That, you know, some of these things sprung up organically and were just happened absent zoning, right? That was just the most logical way to build shared walls and making best use of the space, maximum use of the space. Over time, we decided that we needed setbacks and we needed, to separate uses more. There was an energy push towards everyone having a single family home. So a lot of the energy was pushed towards doing that and building these large subdivisions with single family homes. And so these other things just kind of fell to the wayside, and then the bias started creeping in towards single family energy in our zoning codes. And so that's why now with these setbacks and with all the various things that are happening, it's just, that's part of the reason. I think another reason is that there is, Captain Voss mentioned, there's some building code issues that come when you add additional units to things, and that it's not my area of expertise, so I'm not going to be able to talk articulately about that. But that's another piece of it. So the cost prohibitiveness of some of these projects. So what we can handle in the planning department is the zoning code. And so you asked about some of those barriers, and I'm trying to remember the slide exactly. I don't have it in front of me right now. But some of the barriers were the minimum lot size or the maximum coverage, and then parking, and just the overall density and setbacks, right? So we can control all of those things within the zoning code. I think it's worth talking about parking a little bit. I don't think Mr. Crowley's wrong in his comments that we have become a very car-centric island. But if we are to survive into the future and house our people, we're going to have to think about other ways to move people around. So I'm glad to hear that Deputy Director of Transportation is here to talk about some of that as well, if you have those questions.
Sure. The bias for single family homes, that's our want to create only single family homes, and we stopped creating this missing middle. And I find it interesting because I obviously grew up in a single family home, but I grew up in a walkable town, a town that we don't build anymore. But that's, for Makwa and Paia, that's exactly what it was like. People lived upstairs and worked downstairs.
Yep.
And that was my version of normal, which wasn't even too long ago, and definitely my grandma's version of normal. So I guess we got to redefine our new normal.
Yep. Thank you.
Member Cook?
Thank you, Chair. So for the planning director, the industrial properties are pretty much less per square foot to build than a lot of residential properties, and they have firewalls and they have higher and the various things. So I guess part of this is an opinion, and I'd like you to give me some feedback. I think that if we had ground floor parking, firewalls, and if we design these buildings and we embrace these buildings, they can be done cost effectively to have residential mixed-use construction density on lots that meet the fire code. The only thing as a builder, the way that you make them cost effective is that you do it in quantity. You have a certain repetitiveness to it without making them boring and ugly, and it become the standard and the norm. The reason we use 2x4s, California platform framing for residential construction is because everybody knows how to do it. The supply chain is getting prohibitively expensive. So anyway, do you foresee a barrier to raising the height so that you could have ground floor parking in a 3-story structure and it be, quote, meet this middle thing?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. I also want to add to something else that you said. So I won't forget to add. I think the trick with ground floor parking is that it doesn't contribute to a neighborhood feel, right? So it puts, again, the car as a more car-centric model of things. It says, where do we put our car? Okay, then where do we put our people, right? And so I think we need to reverse that. Where do we give people livable spaces? And in Stefan's presentation, you can see even in the densest version, the one that he had in Kahului, people had front porches. People had a place to interact with each other, kind of like Councilmember Hodgins mentioned. Like there was a place for people to be people outside of their cars. The other thing I want to mention is you said at scale, that this often works at scale, and Mr. Crowley brought up that similar comment. But there's a movement across the country right now called the Incremental Development Alliance. These are people that have said, we're going to take these small lots and one at a time, we're going to redevelop them and we're going to make them and apply this missing middle model. And I encourage the council, I'm taking a group of folks from the planning department to the Congress for New Urbanism, where Incremental Development Alliance has a great big showing. They train people how to do this incremental development, how to do these one at a time projects and make the most of the money they have and all of that. So it can be done at multiple levels. And I just, yeah.
Chair, since we have one round of questions, what do they do with the cars?
In these projects. So in the pictures that were shown, that Stefan showed, they have parking. So they do have some, in that one that was in South Kihei area, or I'm not sure what part of Kihei it was, but in Kihei, there was a garage under the second ADU on the back, and then there was parking on the back. So what they're just doing is reorienting the lot so that it's more organized that way.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. That's it.
Member Johnson?
Thank you, Chair. And so, Director, I appreciate your responses. I just want to ask a couple follow-up questions. Can you tell me some of the lessons you folks learned about Kauai and what they're doing? It seems to me that you went to Kauai. I'd like to hear how what could we cherry pick from them?
Mahalo. So while I was getting your question, Stefan said, I need the call-in number. So I apologize if I can have 1 second to give him that number. That would be really great.
For anyone watching online, it is 1-808-977-4067, and the code is 607-929-65#.
Okay, that was really helpful. Thank you, Chair. So to answer your question, we have not yet been to Kauai, but we did pick Opticos Design. And so we haven't been yet. We're going in April, end of April. We're going to be talking about our zoning code with them. We're also going to be talking about their very successful Lima Ola project, which was a project that where they basically entitled the land and then RFP'd out the vertical for affordable housing. So we're going to go talk with them a little bit about that. But they've been, Opticos has been doing their community plans. They did West Kauai and South Kauai community plans. And within that, they incorporated these principles. They're also doing a transit-oriented development around the government center at Rice Street. And so, they're doing all kinds of things there. One of the things I'll stop.
Well, I was just going to say that after the visit, maybe we can get a letter from you and tell us what else you learned.
Certainly.
My next question's in regards to the pre-approved plans that we've had in I assume it's in Planning Department. Do we have those pre-approved plans that are for missing middle?
So thank you for your question. I think the pre-approved plans would go through Department of Public Works for the building permit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We would only review them for compliance with zoning.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's just something I thought would be really interesting for our community, that if we did have pre-approved missing middle plans, and that might help with a lot of this. I think my last question, and I didn't hear the bell, Chair, let me know if it went, but in regards to the parking, it seems that we're going to get stuck on this a lot. I think, the idea of parking. And, we have the free fare bus pass where since that's been enacted, since post-fire, I should say, for the 500,000 people have rode the bus. So I think there are people, obviously 500,000 of them, who will take the bus. It's a small investment for the county if we start covering those bus passes for everyone, and just kind of really bolster up our bus system or any type of multimodal transportation, because if we can pull 500,000 people off the roads and put them on a bus, that kind of really does change the way people are traveling. So,
Member Johnson, were you able to hear the bell?
Yeah, I heard that one. So
Okay.
I guess I'll wait for second round unless she wants to do a one-word answer. I don't know, but I can hold on.
Oh, no, I just was checking if you could hear the bell. Did you have an answer for him?
I have a small thing to add, if I may. That's
Okay.
an answer for him. In addition to buses, thinking about connectivity of sidewalks and bike facilities as well. I live just down the street here by Wailuku School, and I know people who get in their car to go up to the school that's above us, Pu'ukukui, that live in my neighborhood right next door to that, because there isn't a safe way for people to walk to school. So those are things to be thinking about as well.
Yeah,
So it's a yes and we need all the things.
and I'll take my prerogative as chair that I've been speaking with the Office of Recovery, because they are talking about having a third-party vendor enforce against on-street parking when the street widths are less than 28 feet. And my comment was, that's only the stick. Where's the carrot? Our transportation is not made for our West Maui residents, given that many of them work nights and the bus doesn't run past 9 to 2 in the morning, or our hotel workers that work as maids sometimes start as early as 4 in the morning. And so, it is a comprehensive thing. I watched the South Maui Town Hall. Director Molina had to apologize to Mr. Moran about his sidewalks that he still doesn't have. And so, I know a lot of people talk about where is the infrastructure first. Where's our sidewalks? Where's our buses that fit our communities? Because, in the resort areas, a lot of people work nights or very early mornings, and our public transportation isn't built for those residents yet. So I think one of the biggest complaints I hear is infrastructure first, and I hear that a lot from South Maui. But just taking my prerogative to make a comment to your question as well. Next up,
I totally agree, Chair.
Kama, did you have any questions?
I did, Chair. Thank you so very much. Early on, when Captain Boss was on, he said that he really supported this because at least for the Lahaina area, they would have protections in terms of what we're talking about. So I just wanted to ask him, are those same protections available to people outside of the Lahaina area? And is there an additional cost for them? Because they would have to probably put more effort into
I'll let him answer, but I think he was referring to multifamily housing has these additional protections. But Captain Voss, did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. I got the question, and Chair Polton, you're correct in that I was referring to the multifamily. Okay. Once you get the 3 dwellings in one unit, or rather 3 units in one dwelling, you trigger a lot of the inherent protection systems that are already in the building code. It's not site specific. It's not anything to do with the jurisdiction. And yes, the infrastructure will have to be there. So that still has to be in place. It's just possibly a more cost-efficient way to build one structure with 4 dwellings as opposed to 4 separate dwellings, and then it comes with the added fire protection per fire code and building code. And zoning also plays a role in what their setbacks will be for those type of structures. So all the parts are there without having to amend anything else to provide more density. It's something we can introduce without really changing any existing laws, as far as my perspective.
It's wonderful, wonderful, thank you. So, Chair, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I just wanted to let you know Stefan is back online via phone. And if anyone has questions for him, he can press *6 to mute or unmute.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to comment about the parking situation, where I think that our Department of Transportation is working on increasing those routes and things like that we all know we need. But I will tell you, getting on a bus when you're shopping for a family of 5 is not a good place. So you're always going to need parking. You're always going to need something to haul your kids and haul your groceries and pick up Nana at the airport and stuff like that. So we should at least think about not having 2 parking spaces, but maybe just 1, per unit. I mean, I heard somebody mention that in the presentation, but I think that parking is always going to be for us that critical issue that we're always going to have to contend with. But I think that the more public trans we're able to get, I think the less use of cars we'll have. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Kama. Did you want to respond to her comment? Go ahead, Director Blystone.
If I may, thank you for that comment. I think it's a good one. And I'm glad Stefan is back on. And if the chair would be willing, he can talk potentially about the project that they're doing in Tempe, Arizona. That's a 100% car-free community. And it has children, it has families in it. And I think they've figured out a novel way to adapt to that situation for grocery shopping and all of that. So if chair wouldn't mind.
I'll let everyone go through their round first.
Okay.
And if somebody doesn't have a question in mind, maybe they could ask that question. Chair Lee, it's your opportunity.
Thank you. So my question is for the planning director. This is a great new idea. But do you think it makes more sense that it would apply to new developments rather than existing developments where one would have to do perhaps substantial retrofitting?
Mahalo for that question. I think, I've often been quoted as saying, we can't build our way out of this problem, and I agree. I still feel that way. But we do have to do some building, and we have to do all of the different things. So it should, be an option for developers who are doing greenfield development. It should be an option for folks who have a small lot in, Makawao and want to try it out. It should be an option, and I think the point of having this conversation with you all is to give you some illumination for when these things come in front of you and you can say, oh, this is just an option. Not everyone has to do missing middle housing, but to make it an option for them to be able to do it in the code is what we're trying to do. So for some people, it's going to be the best solution. For some people, it's not going to be a good solution at all.
Okay, so because a lot more density is being added to a normal sized lot, would you think more notice to the neighbors, especially an existing neighborhood, would be required?
Mahalo. I think, so the point of these missing middle housing types is that they blend in pretty seamlessly. So you shouldn't feel that density. I know Mr. Crowley mentioned that he went to the spot in Kihei and said, there's no way you could feel this. But when you looked at the image that Stefan put on the screen, I don't know about you, but I looked at that and I said, yeah, that feels pretty natural. So to answer your question, I don't think there's additional noticing that we would want to require. It would be awkward to put something like that in the code anyway. But I think the point of that is that it's not like your typical 150, multifamily 6-story structure. These are human scale. They should fit in the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, Member Sinensi, your opportunity.
Mahalo, Chair, and mahalo for the presentation. I was just thinking during our deed restrictions discussions, we really found out how much a single-family home is running nowadays or costs, and so I'm supportive of having this middle housing just to keep those costs down. I think past councils have not supported like trailer home type developments, and so when we talk about upward movement, you can't move from not having a house to $800,000, right? So I think this could help get those homes that people can afford, put equity into it, and then as they grow, they can always sell it and have that upward mobility. My question was for Stefan, and he mentioned that there was some incentives for developers or builders to do this. Can he speak to those incentives?
Mr. Stefan, if you can press *6 to mute or unmute. Oh, he's
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for that pause. Yeah, I would say that we are working with a lot of different jurisdictions, sizes and kinds all over the country who are dealing with this. One of the things that had a big impact on feasibility was the application and review timeline. And just that I think on average, multifamily projects on Maui, they tend to take over a year for approvals. And that is actually a significant cost that the developer ends up carrying. So one incentive is to see if there's a way to shorten the application review time. And many of the jurisdictions who we're working with, they try to actually incentivize. We use the term buy right a lot, but at the very least sort of limit the review time for these kinds of projects so that folks are incentivized to actually approve them or to submit them rather. So the review time is sort of one key lever, I think, that you have. Another one that I think was sort of came up in sort of the last comment is that some jurisdictions are thinking about this as like a local bonus where if you presented a missing middle project, you are granted a density bonus. And in the case of Sacramento, for example, where some pretty significant legislation was just adopted citywide, if you offer one of those units or a certain number of those units as a deed restricted unit, then you actually are allowed to propose the project on sort of on a by right basis, meaning that if you meet the development standards, you could actually get approval for the project. So that is sort of another consideration that some sort of density bonus or unit bonus, particularly in exchange for an attainable or even a deed restricted unit, could be something that could be considered as an additional incentive.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Member Sugimura, your camera is off. Are you ready for your opportunity? I'll take that as a no. For my opportunity, Mr. Stefan, could you send, there's Member Sugimura. You want to go, Member Sugimura? Go ahead. Oh, okay. I was wondering, first of all, why only Central, South, and West Maui were looked at, and also if you could send us any examples of deed restriction by right development or affordability by right development.
Sorry, Sure, thank you for those questions. One of the reasons why we focused just on West Central and South Maui was to focus on the areas that are already most developed, where most of the infrastructure and most of the existing neighborhoods are actually concentrated. And that was sort of a prime consideration for trying to determine what areas would be appropriate, where there is already sort of the most existing infrastructure, existing neighborhoods, existing services and amenities.
Okay.
And that's sort of really why we sort
we're on a
of
limited
focused on that
time.
geography.
And then, do you have examples of the deed restrictions or the affordability that you're speaking to?
Yeah, I would be happy to share those with the committee. I mentioned what the City of Sacramento just adopted is a pretty innovative example.
Awesome. And then the other question on the slide about reducing parking requirements, did you have an opportunity to see, like, you know, some of the narrower streets in our older neighborhoods and the prevalence of on-street parking? Has any of these missing middle cases been afflicted by an entire town burning down, lack of evacuation routes causing high numbers of death or anything of those sort? Because that is what occurred in West Maui.
Sure, and I think that's a great question, and it's good to sort of not forget about that. I think the connectivity of the neighborhood is sort of a key factor in trying to determine where this kind of housing might be the most appropriate. And that was sort of part of the analysis. That's always going to sort of be an important component of neighborhoods that work but also are safe. And that is sort of a key factor in determining which sites would be missing middle ready, as I mentioned in the presentation.
So, yet you said Lahaina was missing, West Maui was missing middle ready, and the whole town burned down and many people died. So I don't understand. If you could.
I do want, thank you for that. I do want to stipulate that as part of this study, we did look at West Maui, but we did not look at Lahaina in particular. That actually was excluded from the study. And we understand that as Lahaina builds back, these things are going to need to be considered for making improvements so that it is actually sort of a safe community in the future.
Oh, okay, because most times when you say Lahaina or West Maui, people just, Lahaina comes to mind. Thank you. Member
Sure,
Sugimura?
I apologize for not clarifying it.
Member Sugimura, your opportunity.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So sorry for that interruption. I have contractors at my house. I love this because this is like what Member Hodges is talking about. This is Wailuku Town. These are all the small towns kind of concept that I grew up in, and it worked. But I believe that the challenges that I see from, where we are today versus that concept is really transportation and walkability. And I think that's an obvious, but how do we then take where we are and, find the solutions and encourage people then to get rid of their cars? Those are the challenges that we face. To ride the bus is basically, very little, but it's not used a lot because we don't have enough accessibility. It's more statements, I guess, I'm meeting. I really don't have questions. I look forward to hearing what solutions we can come up with. But I really would like to encourage the planning department, and if I could tag along to visit Kauai, that Lima Ola project, I think it's called, which I heard Director mentioning it before, but they certainly have done a lot of good things with, just through their planning process and government taking that first step of doing the infrastructure and better planning, I think. It's exciting, but I don't know how you moosh that into where we are today, Director. Do you have a comment?
Of course. You do it one step at a time. We make one decision at a time, and we get us closer to where we want to be. So we fund bus systems better. We pay for the sidewalks that people need to get from place to place. We put in bike lanes. Those are all the steps that we have to take, and we have to do it step by step. And we also ready our zoning code. This is the role the planning department can play, is ready our zoning code. When we review projects, we can suggest to developers that they put in amenities for bikes and pedestrians. These are all, we got to do a million little things. I was going to say 1,000, but 1,000 is not enough. It's like a million little things that we got to do to make this possible, to go from where we are to where we want to be.
I agree. And I just want to say this is my opportunity to talk about the problems of Onehe Street, which is that in Kahului, and what the neighbors are then complaining to us. So I hope that when we go along do these steps, that we're cognizant of how to mesh our, today vision in with existing homeowners right in Kahului town by Kahului, the Kahului Park. And, the pool, that section, that one street, what a nightmare. So it's supposed to be smart planning or whatever, but it
Remember,
certainly
Selena,
is
can
not.
you share with us the complaints? I never got them.
Oh, so as people are parking on the sidewalk because there's not enough parking spaces, there's flooding that's going into I forget the side street, but on Nehe, there's there's a home that when it rains, across the street is a park, right? So the way it's built, it floods right into
like Uhu Street?
Their mother's house. Huh?
Uhu
I'm sorry,
Street?
what?
Are you talking about Uhu Street, right where the swimming pool is on?
No, not where the swimming pool is, but it is a side street off of Onehe Street. So
Onehe.
It's not by the pool. Yeah, but that's the street, and it's wonderful. They did a lot of, wonderful things. Yet the residents who are living there, it just does not work. Or there's a lot of challenges. So, and hit and run accidents and, things like that are going on. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we did put a lot of money into all that painting and the angle parking and all of that. Okay, I wasn't aware. So members, I just wanted to do a temperature check. We have two pretty big, complicated bills. Do we want to continue on this presentation, or do we want to start to take up the bills? It'll be easier if people came prepared with their reading done. We may have to explain a little bit more if people didn't. Peace. You want to go on to the next two bills? Okay. Is that consensus, Gengi? Okay. At this time, we'll thank Mr. Stefan for his presentation, and we'll take a 10-minute recess, and we'll come back. The planning department did send us really good answers for Bill 103, which might pre-answer a lot of your questions. So you guys got 10 minutes to read as much as you can.
Chair, before we recess, could we adjourn this, or could we defer this item if there are no objections from the members?
Yes. If there are no objections, the chair will defer this item.
No
so
objections.
Deferred.
No objections.
And we will go into a 10-minute recess to return at 3:03.
Thank you, Chair Powell.
Will the Disaster Recovery International Affairs and Planning Committee return to order? The time is now 3:06. Thank you everyone for that recess. For the next two items, I'd like to take up DRIP 2, Bill 103, 2024, amending chapters 19.08 Maui County Code relating to resident density within residential districts, and DRIP 3, Bill 104, 2024, amending chapters 1904, 1908, and 1929 Maui County Code relating to kitchens, kitchenettes, and wet bars, and section 19.36N.020 Maui County Code to add parking requirements for dwelling units with kitchenettes. If there's no objections, take them up at the same time, but if we do have testifiers, they'll get their full testimony for each item. No objections, awesome. So Bill 103, 2024, purpose is to increase the allowable density in R1, R2, R3 residential zoning districts to provide additional housing opportunities in Maui County. There is an amendment summary form dated March 13th, 2025 from myself with a proposed CD1 version of Bill 103 entitled A Bill for an Ordinance Amending Chapters 1908 and 1936B Maui County Code on Dwelling Types and Density within residential districts. The proposed CD1 version includes the following amendments. Amends the bill's title. 2, amends section 1908-020 Maui County Code for consistency with dwelling types inserted into the table of development standards such as single family, duplex, multifamily. Number 3, in section 1908.020 Maui County Code replaces long-term residential dwelling units with the type of dwelling units allowed. 4, allows one dwelling unit per 5,000 square feet of lot area instead of one dwelling unit per 2,500 square feet of lot area on the islands of Maui and Lanai. 5, exempts multifamily dwellings of up to 3 units in residential districts from landscaping requirements for parking areas. And 6, incorporates technical and non-substantive revisions. The committee may consider whether to recommend passage of Bill 103, 2024 on first reading with or without revisions. The committee may also consider the filing of Bill 103, 2024 and other related action. Bill 104, amending chapters 1904, 1908, and 1929 Maui County Code for kitchens, kitchenettes. Purpose is to provide lower cost opportunities for more autonomous living areas in a dwelling unit by amending the comprehensive zoning ordinance to 1, allow for kitchenettes in dwelling units in the residential and rural districts on Maui and Lanai, and 2, require a dwelling unit with a kitchenette to be occupied on a long-term residential basis with 1 additional off-street parking space to accommodate the higher density use for each kitchenette. Bill 104 also makes conforming amendments to the definition of kitchen and wet bar. An amendment summary form dated November 14, 2024 from the Housing and Land Use Committee Chair, 2023-2025 Council term with a proposed CD1 version of Bill 104, 2024 entitled A Bill for same title. Proposed CD1 version 1 incorporates clarifying revisions to the bill's title and purpose statement. 2, removes the requirements for dwelling units with kitchenettes to be occupied on a long-term residential basis and to have 1 additional off-street parking space for each kitchenette from the definition of kitchenette, and inserts the requirements into chapter 19.08 and 19.29 Maui County Code. And 3, incorporates technical and non-substantive revisions. Also, an amendment summary form, 2 amendment summary forms dated March 12, 2025 from myself, proposing to amend the proposed CD1 version of Bill 104, 2024 by reducing the number of permitted kitchenettes in a dwelling unit from 2 to 1 with the county residential and rural districts on Maui and Lanai, as well as one, amending the definition of kitchenette to add the phrase that is internally accessible via an enclosed living area, and to prohibit gas appliances and prohibit kitchenettes in accessory dwelling units. And this is at the request of the planning department. The committee, that second amendment, the committee may consider whether to recommend passage of Bill 104, 2024 on first reading with or without revisions. The committee may also consider the filing of Bill 104, 2024 and other related action. So, this is part of the package of bills that had been referred to us this last summer by the administration, 103, 104, and 105. We've already passed 105. 103 and 104 kind of go together along with Act 39 from the state legislature. And I understand that these are very complicated things to try to visualize. We've asked a number of questions to a number of departments. We can take action today. If we don't take action today, we'll either have to schedule a recess date or wait until after budget. That being said, because it's so complicated, I don't want to rush anyone, although I'm talking fast. And I don't want people to feel uncomfortable that they're passing something that they don't fully understand. So we'll just do the best we can. If members can think as we work, if they'd rather try to find a recess date or hold off until after budget, or if everybody understands everything perfectly and are for it, we can try and pass it today. So those are kind of our options to keep in mind. I guess our hard stop might be 5:30. I know we're losing at least one at 4:30. So we have member comma. Yeah, I was told. So those are the things going on in periphery of what's Bill 103 and 104. So at this time, I'd like to receive opening comments from our resources, and then we'll take testimony, and then we can get to it. So, yes, member comma.
So if we had to recess this meeting, what would be the next date to?
It would probably have to be sometime before the 25th, or no, we likely won't be able to get a recess date.
So you would defer, adjourn, defer, and then continue at the next
after budget, because this is our last meeting before budget. It's a heavy meeting, but we hit the ground running with 105 because there were people waiting to submit their permits, and they had like so much time with their insurance, so we had to start with that one. Oh shoot.
That's not good. That's not a good sign.
Chair, could we take a 2-minute recess to reestablish internet connectivity?
Yeah, we're gonna take a little recess and we'll come back at 3:17. Will the DRIP committee meeting return from recess? The time is now 3:19. Thank you for that pause for technical difficulties. We were just about to start with opening comments from the planning department.
Mahalo, Chair. Just a couple of things that the planning department would like to point out. There's unfortunately a couple of minor amendments that we'd like to propose. One is in regards to Bill 103 and one is in regards to Bill 104. We had submitted a letter to you dated yesterday, but I don't think it's posted on Granite Cassette yet. We're trying to get that on there. And then one minor amendment to 104, and I can read those into the record if you like. But that's all the comments that we have right now.
Thank you. Corporation Counsel?
Yes. Test. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I was asked to address a few different items in correspondence. I understand the chair would like me to prioritize a couple of the responses. I did not have the opportunity to provide a written response, but Chair, if you want, did you want me to go over the Act 39 items now?
Yeah, Act 39 in your opening comments.
Okay, there were a couple of questions on the State Act 39, which I believe is now codified in HRS 46-8. 46-4.8, I believe. That requires the counties to no later than December of 2026 provide for the allowance of 2 accessory dwellings or the reasonable equivalent on any residentially zoned lot for each allowed dwelling unit, and so that allows a dwelling unit. And the question I was asked was, well, I was asked several questions. One of them was whether or not this, the planning department had provided an earlier response, and one of the questions was whether or not allowing for, as I understood the question, whether or not allowing for 2 additional dwelling units, whether they're characterized as accessory units on each lot. So essentially 3 units on each lot is considered the reasonable equivalent of the 2 accessory dwellings that are required by the Act. And in looking into this, I do believe that it's correct that if a lot allows for 3 dwellings, that you're meeting the requirement of allowing at least 2 accessory dwelling units on each residentially zoned lot, because whether they're designated accessory or just dwelling units, you're talking about 3 dwelling units. And because the legislature put the language in accessory dwelling unit or its reasonable equivalent, I believe that allowing those 2 additional units, whether they're designated as accessory, is consistent with that purpose. However, there's no definition of what accessory dwelling is in the state law, unfortunately. There's nothing there precisely. There's a definition in the county code, but not in the state law. So for me, logically, allowing at least 3 dwellings on every lot within a residentially zoned lot would be the equivalent of 2 accessory dwellings. Without a clearer definition, it would not be as clear as simply saying each residential lot is allowed 2 accessory dwelling units. This bill would allow for at least 2 additional units, but would not necessarily characterize them as accessory. So if you wanted to be 100% certain, you could allow for 2 accessory dwellings, but I do believe this bill, because it allows for 3 dwellings on each of those lots, accessory or otherwise, would be consistent with the purpose of Act 39. To back up a bit, Act 39 does require that by December 2026, that there be these provisions in place. If the county doesn't do that by that time, anybody who applies for an accessory dwelling unit or 2 accessory dwelling units on the lot would have to be granted a permit with some exceptions, which would allow for denial on the basis of infrastructure design or development standards. Now, again, compliance with that law isn't required until December 2026. So whether you do that through this or some other bill, or there's still questions after this, there could potentially be adjustments prior to December 2026. But I think the question was how this is addressed. Is this addressed by this current bill? And I do believe allowing 3 dwelling units would do that. Also, allowing 2 accessory dwelling units on each of those lots would do that as well. And then the other questions involved in this were whether there is a ability to to allow additional, to clarify in the purpose of the bill that this is, these additional units are considered the reasonable equivalent of those dwelling units. And I think that that's acceptable as well. And then finally, one of the questions asked was whether or not the requirements of Act 39 apply outside of the residential districts, specifically the county rural district. And the Act exempts any property outside of state urban designated lands, and it also does not apply, in my opinion, in the county rural district. There's language in the bill that says it excludes lots in a county zoning district intended for rural, low-density residential development, and I would confirm that that would include 19.29, the county rural district. So those requirements of Act 39 would not apply outside of the state urban designated areas under HRS 205, as well as county rural districts. So it essentially is going to apply to the county residential districts. And it does, again, it imposes the requirement to allow for 2 accessory dwelling units on those residentially zoned lots. It doesn't define accessory dwelling units, and it does allow for the use of the reasonable equivalent of 2 accessory dwelling units to satisfy the requirement. So I do believe that this bill would satisfy those requirements, but to be 100% certain, simply allowing the 2 accessory dwelling units rather than saying just an additional dwelling unit that could be a main dwelling would be one way to do that. But I still think allowing those 2 units would be the reasonable equivalent, whether or not they're designated as as accessory.
Thank you, Mr. Hopper. Any opening comments from Captain Voss?
No comments at this time, but here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any opening comments from Director Molina?
Hi, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. Jordan Molina, Director with Public Works. I just wanted to note that we didn't get our responses to the committee's letter back to you folks. And so I can provide those responses now if you prefer, or I can bring them up later.
Let's see if people have questions on it. But when you get a chance, if we don't vote them out today, we would appreciate the written responses.
Okay, thank you,
But
Chair.
if we vote them out today, then no need. Okay, any opening comments from Environmental Management? Director Agawa?
Hi, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. Nothing in addition to our written responses to the questions, but if you folks have any questions, feel free to ask and I can help answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. I did like the examples that you gave of the building permits. And last, we have Office of Recovery, who I believe has a presentation for us.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a few slides. If staff could bring them up, I'll try to go quickly. And I'm just trying to cover some of the things that have been discussed in the prior meeting, but you can proceed to the next slide, please. So, the intention of introducing these was initiated as a result of the disaster, and it was in response to comments that were provided by the community of the way that housing had developed in the Lahaina area pre-fire, and that there was a desire to reconstruct those things, although they were called nonconformities at the time. That was not factual. They're just strictly illegal improvements. And so we wanted to try and provide a way to legalize that. If we could proceed to the next slide. So basically, West Maui was affected by a housing shortage prior to the fires. It primarily consists of smaller size lots. And the pre-fire needs for housing resulted in customary use, including additional units and kitchenettes that were not able to be legal and were not therefore inspected or compliant with existing code. Office of Recovery's preferred outcome would be to empower residential owners to take housing solutions into their own hands and acknowledge past trends by creating a process for legal construction of improvements in compliance with our code requirements. Go to the next slide. There was a little discussion about Act 39, and I know that the chair put forward a proposal that the density bill 103 be adjusted to 1 unit per 5,000 square feet. We'd respectfully put forward the consideration of 3,000 square feet per unit, and the reason for that this would allow zones R1 and R2 to participate in this change. The R1 minimum lot size is 6,000 square feet, but it allows for 1 ADU. With a 3,000 square foot minimum, there could be the 2 dwellings, and it would allow R1 through this measure to be compliant with Act 39. The other is R2, which is a minimum lot size of 7,500 square feet and allows 2 ADUs. They would be able to get the additional main with that provision. If we could go to the next slide, please. If you look at a zoning map of the Lahaina area, you'll see that the majority of the fire affected area in yellow is R1 and R2, with essentially the Wahikuli area being R3. And so the majority of those areas wouldn't be able to participate in these increases in options for them unless we were to come to a conclusion of the existing proposal of 2,500 square feet or 3,000 square foot per unit consideration. If we go to the next slide. There was also concern raised by a Lahaina resident during our last meeting about the sufficiency of parking. And there was a proposal, which was a good idea, to consider doing parking by bedroom as opposed to square foot, which we do now, because you can fit more bedrooms in the square foot. Like, there's a more accurate reflection of the number of drivers by bedroom as opposed to total square footage. So what I'm proposing is on the left side, and the table on the right side is what's existing. It's a screenshot from our existing zoning code 19.36B. But that for single family dwellings, that studios and 1 bedrooms have a requirement of 1 stall, essentially be treated as equivalent of accessory dwelling units. For 2 bedroom homes, that there be 2 stalls. For 3 bedroom homes, that there be 2 stalls. But as you start to go up to 4 bedroom, that you add 1, and so on for each additional bedroom above 3 bedrooms. I think that would be a good balance for what is intended by this legislation, which is smaller scale dwelling units, but it would also account for scaling up. And then the final thing, and it may be unnecessary at this point, but I do want to share it just because there was concern about condominiumization. But I think that it has value in this consideration because it allows for fee simple ownership. If we go to the next slide, please. Essentially, these will amount to smaller size homes and smaller size yard areas, and those will be valued or priced lower than larger homes with larger yards. The ownership, a fee simple ownership allows for building equity of property owners And I think that that is really something that we need to try and find for our community members. Having housing is fantastic. It's very important. But if we can help them get to the next level economically, I think that that's very beneficial for them over the long term. And providing a condominiumization situation doesn't preclude renting. And, you know, there was discussions in the prior item and discussion of tax structures and things like that. I think that that is a way to address second home ownership. We go to the next slide. I know that you're all aware of this, but I just want to go over this. This is the reason that fee simple home ownership is critical. This is the rate of inflation. This goes back to 2005. The reason this is deceptive, and this is straight from the Federal Reserve, one of the Federal Reserve banks. The reason this is deceptive is because this is the rate of inflation period to period. It's always up. It's just how much up it's going. And so if we can go to the next slide. This is also from a member Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and this is the difference in $100,000 between 2005 and 2024, and it's basically 61% inflation is the real. So the rate that you saw on the prior slide, that's incrementally how you get to 61. I'm sorry, and so if a member of our community is able to buy into one of these attainable houses based on their scale, and they lock in a mortgage, if the federal government inflates the money supply, they don't get harmed that way by that. If you're renting, your rents adjust upwards, and you can be in a sort of a treadmill. So anyway, I just wanted to advocate for that feature, and that's all that I have to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. And last but not least, we have Deputy Director Yogi. Any opening remarks?
Good afternoon. No, I'm just here to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Did any of our resources have any opening comments? I know planning did 103 and 104. Anyone else have opening comments on 104 that I missed out from folks? Seeing none, okay. We'll move on to public testimony for DRIP 2 and DRIP 3. Please let us know which item you are testifying on so that staff can time testimony for each item separately. If you are testifying on both items, please let us know when your testimony for the first item ends and your testimony on the second item begins so we can adjust the timing. At this time, we will call on testifiers wishing to testify on DRIP 2 and DRIP 3.
Thank you, Chair. First up to testify, we have Mr. Tom Crowley on Teams.
Mr. Crowley, we're ready for your testimony.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'll try to be as brief as possible. On Bill 103, I support the reduction to one dwelling per 5,000 feet from every 2,500. As Mr. Hart just said, that really is not going to change things in R1 and R2. And I don't think there's any reason to change things in R1 and R2 because one house plus two accessory dwellings is a lot already on a really tiny lot like this. But it would allow in R3 zoning to at least have one more main dwelling, and I think that would be the prudent way to go about this. I also support the parking requirements that Mr. Hart just presented. I think that's a better way of going about it. And I support the terminology changes that the chair has put forward from long-term residential housing to the more descriptive terms of single-family, duplex, and multifamily, because that is how insurance companies rate properties. They're going to give you an insurance policy on a single-family home, and that's going to be a different insurance policy than a multifamily home. So I think it's important to maintain that. I am very interested to hear more from fire, wastewater, and the other departments on exactly how this additional density would impact their reviews of individual applications. I don't want to set people up for failure and say we've now passed this, but now when the guy actually submits it, he finds out he has a whole bunch of new requirements that are on him that didn't apply on that first or second dwelling and that kind of thing. So I look forward to hearing that discussion. Moving on to Bill 104 to reset my time. I support the reduction from 2 kitchenettes to 1 kitchenette. I think that's prudent. And also making clear that you have to have an internal connection to clearly define that this is a single family dwelling unit. We just happen to have this extra kitchen. Now, if we happen to close that door and use that as another unit to separate people, that's fine. But it's still a single family unit. I am reminded of a property that was in agriculture zoning where it was like a 5,000 square foot house, and the guy hung 4 units off of the side of it, with each of them containing what was supposedly a wet bar, okay? But essentially he turned one single family house into an apartment building with 5 units. And that obviously is what we're trying to not have happen here. So again, going back to, I think 1 additional kitchenette besides the kitchen is proper. I do have concerns, however, when we make these new definitions of kitchenette and we change existing definitions and so forth, that this could create some problems for existing B&Bs that have been approved in their current configuration. So I really don't like this particular thing that says we shouldn't allow this for any short-term rental kind of thing, because let's keep in mind, we only have 146 B&Bs, and we really have had very few, if no, new applications since we've put the 5-year ownership requirement in place. And I would hate for this new change to then be misinterpreted, and then we have problems with the existing B&Bs getting what they already have in place approved at their renewals and such. So I don't think there is a need or a concern for these units that we might be creating being turned into B&Bs. And let's say even if a few were, isn't that what we're going for? We want to actually make people be able to afford their own housing. And when someone can use one of their rooms as a B&B, that helps them afford their housing. So again, I don't think you need that. And I do think that you should wait until after budget to take action on this. There is an awful lot here, particularly this, how many square feet are we going to allow an extra dwelling? If we're going to double the density in some of these areas, I don't think the public is really aware of what that really means. And I think you would want to have a public hearing and make sure that the public understands what is being proposed here. What keeps going back in my mind when going back to this condominiumization is I look at Lahaina and I look at this broad area where I just know, unfortunately, that a lot of these owners are not going to be able to rebuild their homes. They're not going to have the financial resources and so forth to do so. And they're going to sell those lots to someone who is going to try to maximize the use of that lot. And I am very concerned that if we allow this condominiumization, you're going to see those lots fill up with second homes. I really am concerned about that. So again, we have more work to do before passing that, and I think we need to think about that between now and the end of budget. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Members, any questions for the testifier? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. If you can call the next testifier.
Yes, the next person to testify is Mike Moran on Teams, followed by Jonathan Helton.
Aloha, Mr. Moran. We're ready for you.
Aloha, Chair and committee members. Speaking for the Kihei Community Association today, and we're just addressing Bill 103, and we did submit written testimony on it detailing the various segments of it, but I'm just going to address the one portion that we did have some objections to, and that was in the CD1 version number 5, which is exempting landscaping in the parking areas. We feel that landscaping is such a small portion of expense overall, and it's such a need for our species, for us humans, to have trees, particularly shade trees. We're constantly fighting that battle, particularly because we're always speaking for our district in South Maui, where we seem to have a dearth of trees. And as someone mentioned to me, and they said, well, South Maui includes Wailea. Wailea has lots of trees. And there was I didn't see it myself, but someone referenced to me a study showing that how the economic structure of a district is reflected in how many trees and how much shade they have in it. And in essence, it's saying that the poorer the area, the less shade, the less trees they have, the less nature in there. So we feel that this is a relatively easy thing to do, and that we're constantly advocating for more trees. We've been working with the commercial parking areas where they're required to have a tree for so many parking stalls. But we see what happens is that they cut the tree down to what the late Ernie Resents told me. Those are lollipop trees. Those aren't, they just cut them down. So we feel it is, particularly if this is going to be for not to the exclusive areas, that it's good to include trees for all the benefits. We know the benefits, how they clean the air, they provide shade, they just uplift human beings when they're in there. So we know this is only a small portion, and we do think you're never going to finish this up today. But if you would consider that as you proceed on this a big measure that you're working on. So mahalo for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Members, any questions for the testifier? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. If you can call the next testifier.
Chair, the last person signed up to testify is Jonathan Helton on Teams.
Mr. Helton, we're ready for your testimony.
Apologies, Chair. His mic is now enabled.
Oh, Mr. Helton, your mic is now enabled, and we're really ready for your testimony this time.
Okay, awesome. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm on my laptop. I don't think my camera is working.
We can hear you.
For the record, Jonathan Helton. I work with the Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. I do a lot of our land use and property tax related research. I want to reiterate some of my comments that I made at the last hearing on Bill 103. The Grassroots Institute supports this bill. We believe that it will allow people to build homes that would help them support intergenerational wealth if they're able to build an ADU or even a second ADU or second dwelling in their backyard. We believe that this would legalize the kind of communities that we want to see in the future. That is, communities that are more walkable, that would help reduce development pressures on rural and agricultural areas. But real quickly, based on the discussion today, I do want to offer 3 comments. The first relates to CPRs. There's been some question about whether or not CPRs should be legal for units that would be legalized under Bill 103. I think that there's some merit to having CPRs as an option. Mr. Crowley mentioned that people rebuilding in Lahaina, a lot of them were underinsured and they're going to have to sell their land. Well, that's true, but there's another way to look at it. If they're allowed to do a CPR and put multiple units on their land, perhaps the CPR would allow them to get additional capital so that they could actually rebuild their house. So now they have 2 units on that piece of land. They've got a little bit of extra money to put into rebuilding their primary unit. And in general, allowing something like a CPR as opposed to a rental would allow families the flexibility to build equity if that's better for them. Some people don't have the capital to simply build an ADU and then rent it out. The second comment I would like to make relates to the amendments about density. I know the Office of Recovery has suggested one dwelling per 3,000 square feet. I think that's a reasonable compromise, as it would allow some of these folks who are looking to rebuild to add that additional dwelling. As a reminder, if you are in an R1 or an R2 lot, you are only allowed to build one dwelling and one ADU if your lot is the minimum lot size, which is of course 6,000 for R1 and 7,500 for R2. So the passage of this bill, and if it were to be set at 3,000 square feet, would allow for additional dwellings. And the final thing I'd like to point out is that I looked over the report from Opera Coast Design earlier today. On page 110, it actually discusses Bill 103. And the authors mentioned that even if you passed Bill 103 in its current form, it would not allow the density necessary to build many of the missing middle housing types that they talk about. So what they're saying is, and this is my understanding of their report, is that even if you pass the current bill with no amendments, that it wouldn't legalize a lot of the different types of designs you mentioned. So I hope the committee considers that when just discussing whether or not the density levels need to be decreased to 3,000 square feet or to 5,000 square feet. So those are some technical comments, but again, at the end of the day, Forestry Institute of Hawaii believes that the approach this bill is considering is a good approach. It's going to help people get more housing. It's going to help housing be more affordable and abundant.
Thank you,
I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Mr. Hilton, were you only testifying on Bill 103 or also Bill 104?
For Bill 104, I had submitted written comments, and I think I'll just leave my oral testimony for Bill 103.
Okay, I did have a question, clarifying question. I couldn't hear you when you said allowing something like a CPR as opposed to, I didn't hear what you said after opposed to.
I apologize. Again, I'm on my laptop. I think my audio is probably bad, but I said as opposed to like a rental, if you were to put up an ADU, typically your only option would be
Sorry, can you speak a little bit louder? Sorry.
Yes, sorry. It would be a CPR as opposed to a rental, because that would be really the only option for a second unit would be a rental if you did CPR.
Thank you. Members, any further clarifying questions for the testifier? Oh, Member Sugimura. Oh, Member Sugimura, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. And Mr. Hilton, could you repeat your third item? You had 1, 2, and 3.
Yes. So the third item on, I believe it's page 110 of the Opera Coast report, they point out that even if you passed Bill 103 in its current form, it would not permit the level of density necessary to build some of the missing middle types that they discuss in the report.
Okay. And the report again was what report?
That was the report from Opera Coast Design. It was the second report, the deep dive that they put together.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Any further questions for the testifier? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Chair, that's all the individuals signed up to testify. If anyone in the audience or on Teams would like to testify, please come up to the mic and begin your testimony or use the raise your hand function on Teams and staff will unmute you. I'll provide a brief countdown. 3, 2, 1. Seeing none, Chair, no one has indicated that they wish to testify.
Thank you. Members, any objection to closing oral testimony and accepting written testimony into the record?
No objections.
Okay. Consider oral testimony closed for Bill 103 and 104. We can jump right into discussion. We did have a lot of transmittal back and forth and really good comments. It seems as though most of the resources being asked the questions on CPR did not support prohibition of CPRing. And And so, I mean, Mr. Hopper is prepared to answer questions regarding that, but just throwing that out there. Planning, before we go into actual questions, did you want to go over a summary of Granicus 48, your proposed more amendments?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, that has just been posted as Granicus number 48, as the Chair mentioned. It's a very minor amendment the department is proposing in the ASF for Bill 103. There was an amendment number 5 that exempts multifamily dwelling units of up to 3 units in residential districts from landscaping requirements for parking areas. And so that was added to the ASF, and we agree wholeheartedly with that. But we found another item within the code which relates to the, bear with me for a minute, I'll point it out directly, relates to the number of parking spaces and whether or not you can basically park in tandem and related to those parking spaces. So we wanted to add the same requirement to a certain section within the code, and that's noted in Granicus number 48, which would, so right now the code requires parking spaces to be arranged so that ingress and egress to a parking space has to have at least 18 feet distance between the parking space and the street. And currently that is not applied to single family dwellings or duplexes. So we want to also not apply that to multifamily of 3 units or less. If we did apply it to multifamily units of 3 or less, as it is in the current code, then you would need 18-foot distance between your parking space and the street. So therefore you couldn't do tandem spaces for a multifamily dwelling unit. So that's basically the gist of the amendments, fairly minor. And that's again in Granicus number 48. There was another minor amendment we wanted to propose in for Bill 104, and I can go over that later if you like, or now.
Now it's good.
Okay. In Bill 104, in amendment summary form number 1, which is in Granicus number 29, this is very minor. On the very bottom of the page 1, it was a proposal to amend section 7 of subsection 19.29030A7. And right now it currently says, the amendment currently says, on Maui and Lanai, all principal or accessory dwelling units permitted under this section and so forth. We just want to remove the phrase or accessory dwelling, or accessory, because this does not apply to accessory dwelling units. In other words, kitchenettes cannot be an accessory dwelling units. So that was just an error, and we just remove the words or accessory from that phrase.
Awesome. And any comments from Mr. Hopper on concerns to those 2 amendments recommended by planning?
Chair, I didn't hear anything offhand that I would have a concern with.
Awesome. Okay, let's jump right into it as time allows. Like the testifier said, I'm not sure we will be passing it out today, but we can work as though we were and get as much done as we can. We'll start off with, I know that Member Kama has to leave. Do you want to go first, Member Kama, or do you just want to go with the regular lineup?
I could go first, Chair.
Okay, let's start with Member Kama since she has to leave at 4:30.
So I wanted to ask, Mr. Crowley made a comment about that this might impact, the second kitchenette might impact B&B. So I wanted to ask Mr. Hopper what his thoughts were on that.
Mr. Hopper?
Remind me, if you could, what provision we're speaking about in the bill? I have the revised version of the bill. Yeah, so, well, if it's on a long-term residential basis, if that's not considered consistent with a bed and breakfast home with a kitchenette, that could, I guess the concern is that, and planning could confirm this, but if the kitchenettes are only allowed in an area with a long-term residential basis, if you had a kitchenette, that area wouldn't be available for a bed and breakfast home use. I would presume that's the concern, and it seems like that would be the intent. But planning can confirm that, but I think that's the issue.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing was in, I think, the presentation from, or in the bill, it says one dwelling unit per 2,500 square feet of lot area. I think there was a question about 5,000, 3,000, but I think, I like the fact that we want to put more on as much less as possible and still get what we want out of all of this. So I like the idea of having the 2,500 square feet of lot area. Just want to throw that out there because there's a lot of discussion that went on, and I liked some things and I was questioning some things, but that's one of the things I did like. Also, the need for trees. You know, I really believe that, you know, if you look at areas where you have lots and lots and lots of trees, the people in the community are so much more happier. And that's why if you look at Wailea, yeah, they got tons of trees because their HMO is high and everybody down there pays for that. But not that the people in Kehe are not happy, but they could be a lot more happier if they had more trees. So I like that idea about hopefully having more trees as opposed to less trees. After all, you know, we do depend on them to breathe fresh, clean air too. So, but other than that, Chair, for now, that's what I took down, that's what I noted, and that's what I am supporting.
Do you want Fire to have any comment on the tree issue? I know we did update the fire code that trees are not supposed to be within 5 feet.
Right, of the right, yeah.
Did you want them to comment?
Yeah, let's ask them that.
Or Mr. Post as well. Go ahead.
Mr. Post then.
Yeah, if you don't mind, if I can jump in on that one. I think what we heard from the testifier was there is an exemption from requiring 3 units or multifamily units of 3 or less from complying with the landscape parking requirements. That is I think the concern that I heard. And the reason why we exempted multifamily units of 3 or less from complying with the parking landscape requirements, because the parking landscape requirements are pretty intensive. They apply to very large parking lot areas, requiring low walls to screen parking spaces, requiring landscaping to screen parking spaces. And so for as small as a development of 3 units or less, we didn't feel that the landscape requirements were necessary for that.
Okay, well, good one. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Sure thing. And I just wanted to mention Director Agawa also needs to leave at 4:30 p.m. But he did answer all our written questions quite thoroughly. But if anybody has questions for Director Agawa, he will need to leave in 30 minutes. So I'll go back to our committee vice chair, Nohe Hodgins, for her opportunity.
Thanks, Chair. I'm gonna just say a couple of thoughts and then I'll share my questions. Thank you for not putting a CPR lot requirement or barring that requirement. Personally, I have 2 brothers. Sometimes they do good and sometimes not so good. And right now, I think that's what a lot of people are going through. And most likely, if we don't figure this out soon, majority of my age people are going to own property by inheriting it. And if they wanted to build on it without being tied to their brother, who maybe sometimes doesn't do so good, we're going to need separate mortgages in order to build a home. And I don't think my mortgage should be tied to his mortgage, and his mortgage should be tied to my mortgage. And right now, I think it's going to cost roughly about $500 per square foot. And so none of it's quite cheap. None of it we're going to be able to really fund ourselves. So to have people to be autonomous in building a home, probably next to what's going to be your sister or your brother or your cousin in my head, because I don't want to live too close to a stranger. So the assumption that we're just going to sell to some random person is, in my head, unlikely, as I can only assume what I would do. And I wouldn't want to live so close to some random person. But that's just my perspective, and I just wanted to share that. I also agree with Mr. Hart at going down to 3,000 square feet for your second dwelling so that we can capitalize on some of the R2 lands as well. I do have a question though. I appreciated very much planning's, I guess, I don't know, scratch paper back to see what this is gonna look like a lot. But I wanted to understand with your design of how this would work on, this is an R2 lot. It's at 7,500 square feet. And the parking code is used here with the 19.36. What would it look like if we needed to use the parking suggestion by Mr. Hart with bedrooms? So in this case, we have 8 stalls. What would change? What would this look like? If you could describe that for me, please. Or you guys want to tag team this description, would be great.
I think Mr. Hart's proposal on bedrooms, I think is a good one because that really ties it into really kind of how many adults really are in a bedroom, right? And how many people can use it. It's kind of a question of how many bedrooms can you get into really then a dwelling unit. In this particular example or the quick sketch, there was potentially for the first and second floor of up to 3,500 square feet. So you're looking at a 1,200 square foot unit, 1,200 square foot units are probably 3-bedroom units, right? My guess, for potentially 3 of them. And so then I can't remember what the parking requirement was, but I assume it probably, does it increase or was 2 and 3-bedroom units were 2 per unit, right? I think is what you were proposing.
Go ahead, Mr. Hart.
Chair, thank you. So I was proposing that 2-bedroom units be the existing 2 as well as 3, and then when you go beyond 3, that it step up for each bedroom.
So I think in this particular instance, assuming that each dwelling unit would have a 3-bedroom, they would still be each require 2 spaces, so you'd be in the same configuration as what you're looking at here.
Okay, great.
Although, if I may, just also while you're at it, in this particular sketch, importantly,
Why didn't I think of that?
that code amendment that I mentioned to require parking, being able to park on your driveway is important for this particular instance because it's a multifamily. So if we didn't have that, you couldn't park this configuration like it's shown right here. You'd have to park other spaces somewhere else on the lot, which would restrict then the size again.
I do like the tandem parking. Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I heard the bell.
Thank you. I wanted to clarify what I heard you say, because I have a chance to, because I'm the chair and I run the show. So what I heard you say is that you like the 3,000 recommendation because it would allow us to maximize the density in R2, but you didn't mention R1, and 3,750 square foot would allow us to maximize the density in R2, but not R1. So did you intentionally leave out R1 because you didn't want to maximize the density in R1? Or?
Not necessarily. I don't necessarily, I'm not against it. That was his suggestion. I do have 3,750 if that's R2, and that's to separate R2. But Mr. Hart mentioned 3,000 and R1 and having that. And I see that the last time it was, in the original bill was 2,500, which would kind of change the language. I'm just saying that's what he said. I have nothing against R1. It would allow R1, I agree. But in my head, if I owned R1, I'm not too sure if I would maximize, as Director Blystone said, it is your choice. I'm not too sure if I would maximize all of this possibility if I lived in R1. Again, it's a personal choice. I probably don't want to live super close next to strangers. That's what I meant.
Okay, and just to clarify, the original proposal from the administration was 2,500 per square feet per dwelling.
Yep.
I countered with 5,000 square feet.
I see.
Mr. Hart came back with 3,000 square feet.
Yes.
But not all of those are proposals.
Yeah.
So just clarifying for people, you know, if you don't want to allow 2 dwellings in R1, which is a maximum of 6,000 square feet, allowing one dwelling per 3,750 would allow for 2 dwellings in R2, which is a maximum size of 7,500 square feet. It would allow for possibly 3 dwellings if your lot is 11,000 something in R3, but not 10,000. It wouldn't allow for 3 dwellings at 3,750, but at 3,000 it would allow for 3 dwellings. So it's all part of the discussion. We're not tied to anything. I think 2,500 is the lowest we can go, and the situation as it is right now is the highest we could go. So just wanted to clarify that. We're not tied to 3,000, we're not tied to 5,000, just 2,500 is the ceiling, I guess, and the current is the floor, or vice versa, however you want to look at it. Okay, Member Cook.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and fire off some quick questions. One for Director Angawa from Environmental Management for Wastewater. Are you available, sir? So if there is,
I'm here.
If there's 3 dwelling units on a lot, are they going to require a clean out adjacent to the curb for each one? Like each one would have a home run from their dwelling to the curb? Like they're not going to be interconnected. You're going to have each dwelling on the lot would have to have its own sewer hookup.
Thank you for
I don't want to get overly technical, but I'm just trying to figure out, because my next question or comment, if I may, I'm supportive of the CPR aspect, because I think if you don't have CPR, is basically what you're doing is you're creating rentals. So if you have 3 CPR'd units, potentially with 3 separate owners, getting in the weeds a little bit, are they going to have their own sewer hookup?
So thank you for the question. So to answer question 1, which is related to question 2, a single-family residential lot would have 1 sewer lateral. So multi-units would need to tie into that single lateral. I do want to make it clear that if the flow sewage volume exceeds 1,500 gallons per day, then they would be required to put in a sewer manhole, property sewer manhole, in lieu of a clean out. So 1,500 gallons per day would be the trigger for that. Now, keep in mind the difference in cost to the property owner. A clean out may cost them $2,000-$3,000. I talked to a resident in Lahaina recently. They got quoted $35,000 for a sewer manhole. So it's a big difference in cost. So just, for people's awareness, if you have these multi-homes on a single lot and they exceed that, they're going to be required to put in a sewer manhole.
Okay, thank you, sir. And thank you, not to cut you off. And then for Captain Boss, for this additional density, is there a potential that additional fire hydrants would need to be installed in a neighborhood?
It is possible, and it comes from a few different directions. There's a lot we have out there for 3 dwellings, and I know currently we've already kind of amended the code a few years ago to allow for 3 dwellings on residential lots. And even with this, we're going to lower the square footage so we can get more places with 3 dwellings. Our biggest concern is when it goes to 4 or 5. That's when there'll be extra requirements that they may not be able to meet, which could include fire hydrants, road widening, and that kind of thing. So for some people that won't be an issue, but in certain properties that could be. It could be what makes it infeasible or even impossible to build that 4th dwelling.
Okay, so anyway, we're kind of getting a framework. I heard the bell, Chair. Thank you. I will wait for my next question for planning.
Okay, I did want to follow up with Director Agawa because he's leaving in 15 minutes. Will they not know if the sewage flow volume is in excess of 1,500 gallons per day until they build what they build, and then they could be on the hook for that additional 35 grand for the sewer manhole?
So it's based on an estimated amount when they apply for the building permit. So for example, I believe a single family 2 or 3 bedroom unit, there's a chart. It assigns 350 gallons per day. So the chart would have to be referred to, and that would give an estimated amount of sewage.
Oh, so they should know before they build it if they're gonna go in excess of 15,000 gallons per day, like an estimate.
Yes, and there is something in the code. I don't know exactly the code number, but after a 4th unit, I think a sewer manhole is automatically triggered for a lot or a CPR lot.
And when you say 4th unit, is it irrespective if it's a dwelling unit or an accessory dwelling unit?
It's just a structure considered a residence, so it doesn't, distinguish between ADU or main home.
Does it distinguish between attached or detached, like duplex? Like if you were to have 2 duplexes, that's 4 units, but that's 2 structures.
That's a good question. I would have to go look at the code to see how defined it gets. I can follow up on that.
Okay, we'll follow up in writing as well. Thank you. Member Johnson, your opportunity.
Thank you, Chair. Is Director Molina on from Public Works?
He is, or was.
Aloha, Director. Thanks for being here. I know you're busy. So I want to ask a question about the pre-approved plans that the department owns or possesses. Do we have missing middle pre-approved plans?
We do not have pre-approved plans as the way I think you're thinking of them. We have a design registration process which allows building plans to be approved prior to construction, but they're not available for anyone off the shelf to just pull them and use them for their project.
That's for developers, right?
It's for anybody that it makes sense that process works for, but generally it's people that are, I mean, it's more than one structure where it makes the most sense.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that response. I'm going to pivot here. I just wanted to ask that real quick question. So my next question is for Director Agawa. I know he's leaving. So, and that question that Councilmember Cook brought up along with Committee Chair Bolton in regards to the sewer, we can put, or can we put a requirement to make these extra units, ADUs, whatever we're deciding to call them. Right now it's ADUs, but can we put low flow? Can we require them to have low flow sewer or low flow water fixtures or low flow just to reduce the number of sewer gallons they're creating?
Thank you for that question. I wouldn't want to speak for water on the low flow fixtures. However, the sewage is tied into directly to the water use. So that is a good question. So the sewer volume is directly tied to the use, but I cannot answer on the low flow. That would be a water.
Okay. I know it does come out at that end, but I'm just trying to solve that issue where they don't have to build a $35,000 manhole. Okay. Now my next question is, I want to say, Jordan Hart mentioned it, the Waiakuli is exempt. Is that correct? Because it's resident 4 is R4 or R3. Can you elaborate on that?
Chair, if I can respond. What I was trying to point out is that the chair had put forward a proposal to increase the minimum square footage to 5,000 square feet. And that if that were done, only the Waiakuli area would benefit from the density proposal. But if it was bumped down to 3,000 square feet, then all of the areas shown the R1 and R2 areas, including the R3 areas of Waiakuli, would be able to make use of the density increase here.
So bumping it down gives us more people that could be affected by it. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair. No further questions.
More people that can take advantage of it. We can send in writing your question about the low flow fixtures to the water department. Did you have more to add? No? Okay. All right. Let's see. Charlie, your opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Before Mr. Agawa leaves, so you allocate, you allow what, 450 gallons per day for 5 people? Is that what you said?
It is 350 gallons per day for a single-family home is the classification.
And, okay, so and on average, how many people in the home?
I don't know if the code says that, but I would assume 4.
Okay. And then, so this includes water. What about if the new person rebuilding in Lahaina now has underground power and a separate line for R1 water, as well as sewer and water, is this going to affect all these additional units? Is it going to get in the way of these additional units?
So for R1, R1 cannot be used in on a residential property. Regarding sewer, you would have one lateral for a property, and then the on-site plumbing would tie into that single service lateral for sewer.
How come you can't use R1 for residential?
Department of Health rules.
That's a great, yeah.
Is something that we're working toward, though, at some point?
I don't want to speak for Department of Health. That has been talked about, but it is a health and safety issue.
Okay. And a quick question for Jordan Hart. Jordan, do we still have the R0 zone?
Chair, we do, existing in the code, yes.
Okay, so can you put an ADU in an R0 if we go to 3,000 square feet?
Chair, I would have to,
Okay.
I would have to read that carefully, but yeah, that's not the direction that
Okay.
this is going in, so I'm not prepared to respond immediately.
Okay, maybe you could respond in writing. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Planning, did you wanna take a crack at Charlie's question? In the chart that I saw on the bill, R0 wasn't included.
Yes, thank you, Chair. R0 is not included in the proposed bill, so the density increase does not apply to R0.
I think her question was if you can have an ADU on an R0 lot.
R0 is about 3,500 square feet. That's the smallest lot.
Unless you got non-conforming, because we have some of those in Lahaina.
Yeah. But they can send it, they can send their response in writing, that's fine. Because I know other people want to get to Shane before he has to leave.
Okay. Let's see. Member Sugimura? Your opportunity, you're muted.
Yeah. So, I actually want to ask Jordan Hart a question. So if anybody else wants to ask Shane before he leaves, please take this opportunity. It's
Member
almost 4:30.
Sinensi, did you want to ask Director Agawa a question? Okay, you can go ahead, Member Sugimura. Of the people that are still here, everyone else had the opportunity.
So when I went to the action meeting in Lahaina on the beginning of the month, I spoke to one of the residents, and on this item of parking per bedroom. I like that idea, as that's what he was saying. He was saying that at the end of his street, there's this house coming up and has 12, I think he has 12 people or 12 bedrooms, but he said the street is getting just crowded with parking. So how do we do this? So if Lahaina is already rebuilding and it's rebuilding in error, I think, sounds like from his description, what happens and how do we convert from this to whatever the existing is?
Is that a question for Mr. Hopper, or you got it?
You know what? No, I don't. Whoever, somebody can answer it because
you got it. Okay, Mr. Hart.
Chair, thank you very much. So I did actually go to Lahaina with one of the residents who was providing concerns about overdeveloped lots and.
It's the same one, you guys.
Okay, so if it is the same person, then so. A couple of the instances that he drove me by were existing homes in Waikuli, and those would be basically homes that were built. They're being used not in compliance with our code as far as a single family dwelling is concerned. The single family is defined in the code. So those would be potentially violations that could be followed up on with complaints. For new construction, there was also new construction instances of large-scale dwellings. Those would be covered by the existing table that's in the presentation that I made. That's, I believe it is on Granicus, but I can't tell you the number. Unfortunately, you can get a significant number of bedrooms into a dwelling unit before you hit 3,000, which is when you have to do one more. So anyway, the parking requirements are not potentially responsive enough. And so what I was proposing would allow it to be more responsive to require more stalls if you're trying to do that kind of scale of development. So those ones that got in under our existing code potentially would become non-conformities. And there may be a few of them, but if we can get this adjusted, we could catch the remainder. Thank you.
Are we talking about the same person? Okay, interesting. Well, appreciate that because I like this bedroom, parking increased by bedroom. And the idea of being able to, condominiumization, I think that's where everybody's trying to get to. And if the owner decides that's what they want to do, I believe that we should do that. And I like the idea of 3,000 square feet. So those are kind of my overall thoughts on this.
Okay, Member Sinensi, your opportunity.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a follow-up on Chair Lee's question, maybe to the department. She mentioned R0 that's not listed in this bill. So R0 would be, she mentioned 3,500 feet to 6,000? Just for clarification.
Mr. Post?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, the lot area required for an R0, which basically means you have a zero setback, is not less than 3,000 square feet. Not more than 6,000 square feet in area for the lot area. I might also add that accessory dwelling units are not permitted in the R0 zoning district as well, to address her question.
Only the main dwelling.
That is correct, only the main dwelling.
But we're seeing a lot of like pre-manufactured homes. Are those for the smaller lots allowed as accessory dwellings?
Yes, they would be for the accessory dwelling units if you can meet the requirements for an accessory dwelling unit. There's certain requirements for accessory dwelling units on certain size limitations, parking and so forth. If you can meet those requirements, then yes, you could do a pre-manufactured home as an accessory dwelling unit.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Those were my questions.
Thank you. I would like to clarify with Mr. Hopper on Act 39, would that apply to R0 if currently the county doesn't allow an accessory dwelling unit, but then Act 39 by December 26 requires us to allow 2 accessory dwelling units in the state urban zoning, which would include R0?
Chair, the requirement, let me just read it here.
And meanwhile, for everyone else, I did want to do a temperature check of what Mr. Hopper said in his opening comments. Are we looking at allowing for this bill and 2 accessory dwelling units, or are we looking at having the additional dwelling unit count as one of the required 2 accessory dwelling units? So something to think of. It could go either way. There's other things that could happen. You know, if we say in addition, then we would let 2 dwelling units in an R1 lot and 2 accessory dwelling units in an R1 lot. Same for R2. R3 could have 3 dwelling units and 2 accessory dwelling units. Each of those dwelling units could possibly have a kitchenette. So just some other things to ponder about, you know, possible unintended consequences. If we don't pass things out today, we could try to write to the Attorney General if she gets back to us in time, if she would consider 1 dwelling unit and 1 accessory dwelling unit to satisfy Act 39 as the reasonable equivalent, and we could go that route. There was correspondence from planning that, you know, an accessory dwelling unit on a R1 lot is restricted to like 500 square feet. On an R2 lot, like 600, and R3, 720. I mean, we could make it all 720 or not, you know. So there's a lot of wiggle room because, I mean, if we're going with 500 for an R1, but then we're going to allow them a whole nother accessory dwelling or a whole nother dwelling unit that doesn't have any size limitation, it's kind of weird to say 500 for an R1, but you can build a whole nother dwelling unit. So just other things to ponder. But Mr. Hopper, you got to answer.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of quote the language. There's actually 2 different ways the county could comply with this. One is what we've been talking about mostly, which is we would need to shall adopt or amend ordinances defining reasonable standards that allow for construction of at least 2 accessory dwelling units or the reasonable equivalent for residential use on all residentially zoned lots. So R0 would be a residentially zoned lot. However, there's other options that the county can do other than that. For example, it can, there's a subsection C here that says that you can basically designate certain districts that are those 2 accessory dwelling lot districts, and they have to have certain criteria. For example, there needs to be an estimate that those districts would add development potential equal to half of the projected 5-year demand in a specific study laid out. That's an alternative. But if we're looking at it from the option A, which we've been talking about, which is to basically allow for accessory dwellings or the 2 accessory dwellings or the reasonable equivalents, R0 would be considered a residentially zoned lot. And then I will also say, though, if it's not done and someone applies, there can still be a basis for the county to deny those additional accessory dwellings, including based on infrastructure and other considerations. But the fact that it's R0, if it's a residentially zoned area, that would be the areas where they want the county to make the amendments to allow for at least 2 accessory dwellings. But again, there's an alternative, which is to create other districts that allow these versus others. And so we could look at that as a potential alternative.
Lots to consider. Okay, second, round 2, Councilmember Hodgins.
Thank you, Chair. I prefer Bill 103's density. I see from the old planning transmittal what it looks like if you have, where it compares the minimum lot size with the existing code density and 103's density, and then Act 39 plus 103's density. That's thick. My question, though, is to Mr. Hopper. So, considering I prefer 103's density, if we use the floor or the ceiling language of 7,500 square feet, and it doesn't allow for R1 and R0, does this comply? And then what about Molokai, who opted out of 103? And how are we gonna let them know, like, hey, Act 39 is a little bit more nuts than what we're trying to propose? And just FYI, it's coming down the pipe. Like, what are we gonna do here? Do we do some changes to 103 to incorporate R1, R0, and send it back to Molokai Planning Commission and let them know Act 39? You know, like, I don't want to force anything down anybody's throat, and they opted out of this, but what does that leave us to do? Thank you.
Mr. Hopper?
Well, the 7,500 square foot discussion, I didn't quite understand that we can go over that. As far as, I mean, Molokai wouldn't be exempt from Act 39 any different than the rest of Maui County from the state's perspective. So they would, essentially, if the county doesn't enact anything and we get to, again, this is not until December of 2026, but if we get to that point, somebody on a lot there would, it looks like the law would say they would apply for 2 accessory dwellings, and the county would have to grant that unless there's some exceptions. Essentially, if it says if a county does not adopt or amend zoning ordinances pursuant to this section by December 31st, 2026, the county shall not deny any permit application on the basis of exceeding the maximum number of housing units allowed if any owner or their designated representative of a single-family dwelling in a residentially zoned lot applies for construction of up to 2 accessory dwelling units or the reasonable equivalent until the county adopts or amends an ordinance pursuant to this section, provided that a county may deny a permit application on the basis of infrastructure, design, or development standards. So, I mean, they wouldn't be exempt from that. So the county, if they continue to be exempted here, and again, they made a recommendation to exclude themselves, but the council could still not agree with that and include them in this bill. That's an option. Or another option is, because you have until December 2026, is figure out another way to comply with this law, either by some other form of amendments other than what's being proposed in Bill 103, or designating these districts in subsections C1 and 2, which appear to allow the county to not necessarily require these everywhere, but to create certain districts where they are required and subject to those requirements. So I think those are the options.
I think I understood everything you said, but I'm going to let that settle in my brain, and then if I have any more questions, I'll ask you some more questions.
I have to say that it's very difficult to explain Act 39.
Thank you.
In a way, I've had to go over it several times for me to get it and to try, and I think, I'm not saying I necessarily get everything, but to explain it, it's difficult because it's not particularly simple, and there's exceptions to exceptions, and it's difficult to deal with.
Thank you for saying that, because it is difficult to understand. Not that you're not explaining it well, it's just a lot to understand. So thank you very much.
And I just wanted to clarify, we cannot add anything about R0 in this bill at this point because the Planning Commission didn't consider that. Is that correct, Mr. Hopper?
That's also a good point, Chair, that all of the proposed changes were to R1, R2, and R3. So you do have a fair amount of flexibility with the intent of the original proposal, but if it included a district that wasn't dealt with at all, yes, I think that you most likely need to deal with that through a different bill or send something back to the commissions on that.
Okay. Go ahead, Director Blystone.
Just a small piece. I was doing some research while y'all were talking about the R0, and it only exists in a very small amount of places. There's one area in Kihei and 2 areas in West Maui, and 2 of the 3 areas are fully developed at this point. So just to rest assured that R0 is pretty minimal.
And Chair?
Go ahead.
Also, the exception that I read about the accessory dwelling units, I think presumably that would apply if the setbacks couldn't be met either. So I don't know what the R0 situation is, but if someone applied for accessory dwelling units that you could not fit in the setback areas, I think that'd be an argument that it did not meet the development standards. So.
Okay, I mean, I know Napili Hall, which is 0 lot lines, and I know Choke folks that have converted their washroom into an ADU, so it happens. Oh, Charlie, yes?
Yeah, so I don't think we should necessarily exclude R0 at this point. Maybe we can add it at a later time, but we want to give people the broadest amount of options possible. And also, I wanted to ask Director Molina about if these ADUs could be these temporary homes now, if they would qualify for ADUs.
Director Molina?
So in terms of meeting the zoning requirements, they could. Now, whether the temporary units can become permanent is a separate issue under the building code that we are working to find paths forward for. Thank you.
Jordan, I hope you find a way, because we'd have to destroy or dispose of thousands of units, and when we could be using them.
We told them, be cautious, because if you cannot affirm compliance with the building codes, this is a bunch of rubbish on our island right now.
Okay. Well, maybe they can find a way to fortify it. Okay, thank you.
And Charlie, I just wanted to clarify, you're saying don't preclude R0 from the discussion, but we can't include it in this bill because it didn't go through the Planning Commission. But
No, I meant at a later time.
Okay, you're talking about a different bill that does go through the Planning Commission.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, I see members raising hands, but Member Cook was next, and he has to leave. So, Member Sugimura, is it okay to let Member Cook go? Okay, and then we can come back to you after, or we can go in order, whatever, members.
Thank you. My question is for both Mr. Hart and the planning. Can 8 cars fit on a 7,500 square foot lot with 2 Ohanas and a duplex? Is there any, okay, we have hardscape aspects of it, but they can park in the grass or something. So there isn't any planning element, impediment. They just park wherever they can fit in there. It's going to be fine.
Yeah, basically, they need to be scaled appropriately, and single family can reverse onto a public street, as opposed to multifamily can't do that.
I'm sorry, a single family can what on the street?
Single family home, like you can park in your front driveway and reverse onto a public street, where like a commercial multifamily construction cannot do that. They have to have circulation to turn around and things like that. And then it's a 30-foot max height in the residential district, so you could build 2 full stories with space underneath. So yeah, you could do that.
Okay, that was my big thing. Okay, thanks. Okay,
I'll add. I'm sorry. You can also park in the setbacks as well, like side yard setbacks and all.
Okay,
that stuff.
that's it. Cool. Thank you, Chair. That's really all my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, it depends too if you have 1 story or 2 story. Like, I live on an R1 lot, and we have underneath parking. So, it just depends on how you particularly configure your lot, the size of square footage of the rooms and like that.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm supportive of what we're doing. My only concern was about playing pretend of people still doing side street parking. And as long as we can stick with, if there is no side street parking, they have an option, then I think. I don't
So
have any
it
problem.
does sound like majority of people do like Mr. Hart's parking recommendation. Is that's okay? So we can incorporate that in the next iteration. Did you wanna comment?
Chair, yeah, I got a text during the call, so I was told to state that DR funding can be used to pursue surface parking in the fire-affected area to support some of these neighborhoods that were much tighter. And then the other thing is that it can be used to support buses and potentially additional shelters in the context of the comment about parking enforcement is the carrot or the stick, but what's the carrot? And so anyway, I wanted to share that with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think Mr. Johnson had to catch the ferry, so that brings us to Member Sugimura.
Thank you. So going back to what Chair Lee was talking about with these temporary housing projects, in my community, I saw for the first time a recreational vehicle parked in an empty lot. And I just wonder how this all fits into this discussion. Somebody.
Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Who do you think would answer your question?
I don't know if Mr. Molina or even Mr. Hart, but this is at first, I think they have them in Lahaina, but the first recreational vehicle popped up on Kula Highway, and I'm like, holy smokes, here they come. Any comment on those and how this complies?
Thank you. Mr. Hart, did you want, or Mr. Post?
Yeah, really, a recreational vehicle is not a permanent use on a residential lot. So whether or not that's there legally or illegally, I can't tell you. It shouldn't be legally because it's not a permitted use on a residential lot. So it has to be a structure.
It's the kind you see on TV. And I was like, whoa, that's what I thought. So I hope whoever is trying to live there just know that it's illegal. And I hope this didn't allow for many of them to pop up like in parks, like a residential park of all these EVs, or RVs, sorry. That's all for now.
Thank you. I just have been informed that we're at bare quorum right now, so if anyone needs to pause for the cause or turn off their camera, we'll have to call a recess. And I have also been asked to ask Corporation Counsel for comment on Mr. Hart's parking proposal as we like it, but it didn't go through Planning Commission review.
Okay, clarify that the parking, is this one of the amendments, multiple ones we've talked about here? Oh.
It's in his presentation that he gave to us. I can give you, or Mr. Post can pull it up. It's suggestion on the left.
If this applies, yeah,
So, Chair, if staff could just clarify, I think previously Corporation Counsel opines that we could insert the landscaping for parking requirements into the bill so long as it was limited to multifamily dwelling units of up to 3 units in the residential districts, because it was tied to the original scope of the bill. So the question is just whether doing a straight up change from size of lot to number of bedrooms across all categories, including studio and 1 bedroom, would be within the scope of the original bill. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, Chair, I think the problem is if you're changing the parking requirement for all units in the residential district in general, I don't think that's something the commission's necessarily looked at. It might be something that everyone favors, and again, this can be confusing sometimes, but it deals with what was the original proposal, and the original proposal was to increase density in these areas, and I think we talked about how that increased new density would be allowed with respect to those new units and the landscaping requirements, and I thought it was okay to make that change because it was dealing with only the new units and sort of was the conditions of those new units. But if you're making changes here that are going to apply to everybody, including existing units, my concern would be that that's a bit broader than the scope of the original bill and not something the commission within the scope of what they had reviewed. If we're talking about parking requirements on the new units that are allowed in these areas because of the increased density, I think that's fine, but I'm a little cautious of just generally amending the residential districts or the parking requirements for all new requirements that the commission hasn't reviewed yet. I hope that makes sense, but I would have a concern with that. That's a good point that you brought up.
Okay, Mr. Hart?
Recognizing what council just said, and this was thrown in to address the concerns that have been raised, but I do want to point out that this legislation wasn't created to address Act 39. It was created because it was trying to be responsive to legalizing the housing that existed pre-fire. I want to encourage the council members to consider moving forward with the proposal as it is, and that the Office of Recovery will commit to working with the planning department to draft something up to go to the planning commissions to try to catch up and get back to council while you guys are at a budget, and not to try to derail the overall initiative. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna lose quorum pretty quick here. I feel like we have things to incorporate and do, and then maybe we can meet up after budget, if that's okay. I think we made a lot of progress today, and I don't want staff to rush and get it all in there, and then maybe we have to do work on the council floor. We're missing 4 of our members, and it is a big, complex thing. So I will take up Office of Recovery and Planning's suggestion that maybe they can get this parking stuff through the planning commissions while we're in budget or somewhere thereafter. And we'll incorporate all the things that into the bill, and we'll send out a couple questions to the AG, Water Department, and like that. And we'll take this up right after budget. I mean, we've spent all our time on 105, 103, and 104 to date. And if that's the direction the committee is okay with, that's what I would like to do. Is there a consensus? Member Lee, is that consensus, or are you raising your hand?
Yeah, but I do have a question for Jordan.
Okay.
Okay, because Jordan, since you're going to be working on parking, I hope that you leave the language broad enough. Let's say a community decides to buy a lot in the neighborhood for community parking. So, if people come up with creative ideas, you don't want to discourage them. So if you could include those types of allowances for parking. Thank you.
Okay, and we have held the birthday girl for 22 minutes after. So I think we deserve to let her go have a drink for her birthday. Unless Member Sugimura had a burning question.
I do. Are we gonna take this to the community and have, you know how
you want
I
a
don't know how we
public
take it
hearing
to-
or something,
oh,
or a
God.
town hall?
Yeah, I think we need to, so that we can hear back from the community before we vote yes, It's kind of interesting. I love, what Chair Lee just said, and if who knows what the community's going to come up with. Maybe everybody wants to have an RV park, which is, I just had one pop up in Kula, and I already heard concerns about it, but who knows what else,
Okay, looks like Mr. Hart wants to answer your question.
Oh.
Chair, I just want to point out that there were 3 public hearings held for each of these measures, the non-conforming bill, the density bill, and the kitchenettes all had one public hearing each in each of the planning commissions prior to coming here. And then one thing I also want to say is that under current situation, an RV park would not be legal and would not be made legal by what we're proposing. Thank you.
Okay, Member Sugimura, if that's what you'd like, maybe me and you, or I don't know, me and somebody can work on that offline, like just maybe a show on Akaku, we talk about it or something, but I think we'll have to choose one, I'll have to choose one person to work on this with.
I believe Member Sugi, oh, sorry, her camera's back on. Sorry, I thought we were losing quorum. Thank you.
Oh, I'll try to see one person to work on so I don't violate the sunshine law on this, and just see if we can do like a press release or maybe a question and answer session or something like that. But I'm gonna need help because I got a lot on my plate. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. If there's no objection, oh shoot. If there's no objection, I would defer these 2 bills, and we'll take it up right after budget, and we'll work on a community outreach that's more comprehensive than the Planning Commission's public hearings, because only the nerds watch that. the planning nerds, which is not a derogatory comment. I mean, doesn't everybody want to be friends with them after high school? So, is there any objections to deferring these 2 bills?
No objections.
No objections.
Okay, these 2 bills are deferred. And this concludes today's Disaster Recovery, International Affairs, and Planning Committee meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. Now would be the time if you wanted to sing happy birthday. The time is now 4:55.
Okay.
Ready?
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy
birthday, dear Nohe.
Happy
birthday to you. Boy, we're terrible. We need practice on
Thank you, everyone.
synchronization.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Nohe.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
The time is now 4:56, and this meeting is adjourned.